from people who work in the Social Security agency and what the chaos that's been created and the lack of the deteriorating service to seniors. I've heard from seniors who are terrified about what's being done to Social Security and how it might affect their lives. I'm hearing demands from our constituents, people demanding, Senator, that we do something about the outrages they're seeing. And I think that when I hear New Jerseyans, by larger and larger numbers, and I'll be back in my state, I know we are planning meetings and a town hall and a lot more this weekend. But I have to say, now more than ever, we need more of it. We need more of it. And one of the reasons I'm here is because I want to elevate those voices of my constituents. I want to tell the stories that my constituents are writing in about, and lift their voices and tell them that they're seen, they're heard. I've been going through section by section, as you pointed out, Social Security, section on healthcare, section on education and the Department of Education and the work that it does. I've been going point by point through. This is the agenda. I didn't know how much of I can get through. But we laid it out. We have binders for each one of these issues. Immigration, we went through. We have housing, the environment, farmers and food, veterans, the corruption that's been normalized by this president, the rule of law, public safety, all of the ways that we know that there is a crisis in our country, and we as a nation need to be more attuned to it and doing more to meet this crisis, to rise up and defend our country, defend our well-being. And all while things are happening that you know. You're the chairman of the Finance Committee, and you have these insights. We've talked about them, about what's about to happen in this reconciliation process. I mean, that's one of the most stunning things. It's almost immediate on this floor. I think we're going to see about the tariffs tomorrow and see how far the president will go, but we do know whatever it is, it's going to affect prices that are going to continue to go up for Americans as inflation has continued to go up for Americans. As the stock market has continued to go down, as people's 401ks have lost so much money, the uncertainty I'm hearing from businesses in New Jersey, the chaos that they feel about the economy, the consumer confidence in this country has gone way down. If you ask the question, are you better off than you were 71 days ago? Not many Americans would say that they're better off. Their costs are higher, their groceries are higher. They're soon to see everything from car prices to food go higher. Their retirement security is under attack. Their health care is under attack. They're losing their Department of Education. They're less safe from infectious diseases abroad. There's so many things that we have to talk to and try to stop. And you're our leader on the Finance Committee, and you know that the tax thing they're trying to run through this now, I'm trying to get my head wrapped around these wacky parliamentary things that even the podcasts I listen to in the morning to inform me say they even spoke about this years and years ago, but they said, oh, this is too crazy, we can't do this. To try to tell the American people somehow that the trillions of dollars of tax cuts that we're going to give disproportionately to the wealthiest people of all, oh, there's nothing to see here that has a zero impact on the budget, so we can do it through reconciliation. That is the biggest hocus-pocus, manufactured artifice that I've ever seen to obscure the truth in America. That what the Republicans are trying to do is cut massively into health care for Americans in order to give tax cuts to the wealthiest, disproportionately to the wealthiest who don't need it, and to drive up the deficits, making our children and our children's children have a more dangerous economy and higher debt payments to make, debt payments that will skyrocket higher than any expense the government makes. We are literally about to see something go through reconciliation that threatens to sacrifice our children's future so that the richest of the rich can get richer. And so I know there's a lot of people who are angry, who are worried, who are feeling overwhelmed, who are struggling to make ends meet, but I know of only one way to do this, and I'm trying to do it myself, is to do things differently, to stand up, to speak up, to not act like this is just normal in our country. There's not a president from Eisenhower to Reagan to Bush on the Republican side that could ever imagine a day where in a UN vote, we side with Russia and China against the Western democracies that we saved in World War II, that we stormed beaches of Normandy for, that we did the Berlin airlift for, that we did the Marshall Plan for. We designed the world order, and now we're turning our back on it. We designed the rules-based world order, and we're turning our back on those organizations. From trashing NATO to getting out of the World Health Organization to getting out of the group of countries coming together to deal with climate change. We're not leading the planet Earth anymore. Our allies are saying openly they can't trust us. The quotes are unbelievable by our allies. Generations of Americans all know one thing: Russia is our adversary. This principle was reinforced after Russia's brutal, unprovoked invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. The American public knows a lot about Putin and his cronies and what they've done to the brave people of Ukraine. Russia has abducted over 19,000 children, taking them from their families and homeland. Russia has targeted civilians, bombing hospitals and schools, including a strike on a children's hospital during the supposed ceasefire negotiations just a few weeks ago. Russian forces have raped and assaulted Ukrainian civilians, and Russia has tortured prisoners of war. One would think, given all the horrors inflicted by Russia, that the United States would continue to treat Russia as the adversary and the pariah that other Western democracies treat it. But that's not what Trump has done. He's done the opposite. On the third anniversary of Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, the Trump administration joined Russia and North Korea in voting against a UN resolution condemning the invasion that has killed over 12,000 Ukrainian civilians and injured 30,000. Imagine that. I had the foreign minister of a great ally in NATO in my office looking at me and saying, basically, what the heck? My friend Chris Murphy on the floor, we sit close to each other. He's further up the dais than me in foreign relations, and this stuff is insanity. Here's NBC News. President Donald Trump has said Ukraine, not Russia, started the war. He called Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, not Vladimir Putin. He called Zelensky a dictator. Meanwhile, Trump's administration is standing down on a suite of tough anti-Kremlin policies. In just over a month, Trump has executed a startling realignment of American foreign policy, effectively throwing U.S. support behind Moscow and rejecting the tight alliance with Kiev, cultivated by former President Joe Biden. The extraordinary pivot has upended decades of hawkish foreign policy towards Russia that provided a rare area of bipartisan consensus in an increasingly divided nation. Trump's recent moves have drawn international attention, unsettling U.S. alliances, and thrilling conservative populists who favor a turn away from Zelensky. The new posture was put in stark relief on Friday during a tense Oval Office meeting. We all remember this. Between Trump and Zelensky, the leaders clashed in front of the press, raising questions about the future of American support for Kyiv. Alliances and partners around the world are our biggest strength against any U.S. adversary or competitor, from China to Russia to Iran to North Korea. We are the strongest nation on the planet Earth, but our strength is multiplied and magnified when we stand in alliance with those nations that share our values and are bonded to us and are committed to us. In fact, the only time Article 5 in the United Nations, that article that says that if one person in NATO is attacked, everyone is attacked, and they all join together, that one time it happened was 9/11, when our NATO allies stood up with America. And so look at NATO. It's been the bedrock of the international order for 80 years. It was created in 1949 by 12 countries, including the United States, to provide collective security, and in many ways to provide collective security against the Soviet Union. Since then, 20 more countries have joined NATO through 10 rounds of enlargement, bringing the total number of NATO countries to 32. The most recent additions were Sweden in 2024 and Finland in 2023, who applied to join NATO in 2022 after Russia invaded Ukraine, because those countries are realizing that the authoritarian dictator that Putin is, who threatens his smaller neighbors, those other nations have realized they should be standing with NATO. That we have a principle of collective defense, as I said, enshrined in Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty. Collective defense means an attack on one ally is considered an attack against all allies. A strong NATO has made America safer and stronger and more prosperous. My colleagues on both sides of the aisle have recognized this. I've been in this body for 12 years. I've been told by people who I've learned from about foreign policy when I came here as a mayor and leaned on people like Chris Coons and leaned on people like Chris Murphy, leaned on people like John McCain, leaned on people like Lindsey Graham, leaned on people like Senator Rubio. He helped pass a law that enshrined congressional action before the president can withdraw from NATO. That law passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. 87 senators voted yes. Senator Rubio, now Secretary of State, said, and I quote, "NATO serves as an essential military alliance that protects shared national interests and enhances America's international presence. Any decision to leave the alliance should be rigorously debated and considered by the U.S. Congress with the input of the American people." 2 weeks ago, though, on March 19th in 2025, in response to news that the Pentagon may give up the role of supreme allied commander in Europe, a position held by an American general since the NATO alliance was formed in 1949, Republican Senator Wicker and Representative Rogers signaled their oppositions in an extraordinarily joint statement warning to Donald Trump that change would, quote, risk undermining American deterrence around the globe. I want to read some of the comments of NATO partners about the damage that has been done in just the last 71 days of Trump's leadership in upending the world order that has helped to keep America strong and stronger and safer and more prosperous. The EU's top diplomat said the free world needs a new leader. Think about that. Think about that. The EU's top diplomat has said in response to Donald Trump that now the free world needs a new leader. Every president of my lifetime was seen as the leader of the free world, and now the rest of the free world, its top diplomat is saying it's time for that to change. The new German chancellor said, "My absolute priority will be to strengthen Europe as quickly as possible so that step by step we can really achieve independence from the USA." He went on to say, "I never thought I would have to say something like this on a television program, but after Donald Trump's statements, it is clear that the Americans, at least this part of the Americans, this administration, are largely indifferent to the fate of Europe. Our ancestors saved Europe. Our ancestors stormed beaches in Normandy, paratrooped into Europe, liberated concentration camps. Our ancestors sacrificed blood and treasure for Europe. It turned Germany from one of history's worst despotic states into a global economic power and a democracy. We were there at the Berlin airlift. We were there for the Marshall Plan. And now Europe is saying it is clear that the Americas, at least that part of the Americas, this administration are largely indifferent to the fate of Europe. That is not true. That is not true. And as long as I have breath in my body and blood in my veins, I will join with the other people on both sides of the aisle. God bless you, Roger Wicker, for standing with the understanding that America is the strongest nation in the world, but our strength is multiplied and magnified when we stand with our allies from Germany to Japan, from Australia to Iceland, that when our country stands up, we don't bully our neighbors like Canada, we don't threaten our allies like Iceland, like Greenland, we don't threaten smaller, weaker nations like Panama, we don't upend the world order. Donald Trump does not speak for me. He does not speak for the traditions of this body. He doesn't speak for the people that are buried, Americans that are buried in fields in Germany and in France and all over Europe. Here is former Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin's speech to NATO and the Atlantic Council. On April 4th, 1949, 12 democracies came together in the wake of 2 world wars and the dawn of a new Cold War, and they all remembered, as President Truman put it then, the sickening blow of unprovoked aggression. That's what Truman said. They were coming together against the sickening blow of unprovoked aggression. You hear that, Putin? And so they vowed to stand together for their collective defense and to safeguard freedom and democracy across Europe and North America. They made a solemn commitment declaring that an armed attack against one ally would be considered an attack against all. Now, that commitment was enshrined in Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty. It was the foundation of NATO, and it still is. And on that bedrock, we have built the strongest and most successful defense alliance in all of human history, and I'll say one of the most prosperous blocs of democratic countries. Throughout the Cold War, NATO deterred Soviet aggression against Western Europe and prevented a Third World War. In the 1990s, NATO used air power to stop ethnic cleansing in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in Kosovo. And the day after September 11th, 2001, when al-Qaeda terrorists attacked our country, including slamming a plane into the Pentagon not far from here, NATO invoked Article 5 for the first and only time in history.
Will the senator yield for a question?
I yield for a question while retaining the floor. I yield to one of my best friends in the Senate. I yield to one of the smartest guys I know. I yield to the guy who handed me the chairmanship of the committee that oversaw world public health and Africa, and still reminds me that he knows more Swahili than I'll ever know. I yield to the guy who, when he speaks up in the Senate, people on both sides of the aisle listen. I yield to my friend who has real friendships, who when I came to and said, we are seeing the worst famines on the planet Earth, that Joe Biden didn't put enough money into the world feeding programs, he went to another appropriator over there, another friend of ours, Lindsey Graham, and together we got billions of dollars of more that saved hundreds of thousands of lives. You are a prince of a man. You are my friend. You are somebody that is a hero who folks don't know their name in the countries that you have affected with your strength on foreign policy. Dear God, my friend, I yield the floor for a question while retaining the floor.
I ask my friend...
Excuse me, I'm going to say that correctly. I yield for a question while retaining the floor. I do not yield the floor.
I ask my friend and colleague from New Jersey if he is familiar with Psalm 30, verse 5.
Not at this moment.
And if not, I offer to repeat it because I think it speaks to this moment. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. This is a holy month. It is the month of Lent. It is the month of Ramadan. It is the period of reflection preceding Passover. And my question to my colleague is rooted in a scripture in the Torah, in the Psalms, forgive me, known to both of us, one widely engaged in these days. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. This is a reminder both of the possibility of redemption, of the urgency of hope, and of your night-long sacrifice on this floor. Let me ask, if I might, two more questions of my friend and colleague. To my colleague from New Jersey, are you familiar with a front-page story on the Washington Post entitled, "Trump's USAID Cuts Cripple American Response to Myanmar Earthquake," an article running today in the Washington Post?
I have not read the paper to this day, but I
had suspected that that might be the case, given that my colleague from New Jersey has dedicated his night to standing tall and fighting hard to make sure that the people of the United States know what is going on. And I'll share with you just for a moment that it hurt my heart to watch the national evening news last night and see a Chinese humanitarian emergency response team celebrated as they pulled survivors out of the earthquake rubble in Myanmar. It did not hurt my heart that there are Chinese nationals providing emergency relief, but it hurt my heart that exactly those people who are the very best in the world at responding to humanitarian crises, exactly those people had just received termination letters, and their work with USAID had just been suspended. Normally, in every humanitarian crisis I've known in my lifetime, the first in are the men and women of USAID and the U.S. Armed Forces. Whether a tsunami, a tornado, wildfires, or an earthquake, we had world-leading humanitarian response capabilities. And I think it is a tragedy that we have not. I think it is a tragedy, and it is reflected in both this article that I've asked my colleague about and in the response of the world, that we have created an enormous opening for the PRC to come in and do what we previously did so well. Let me ask another question, if I might, of my colleague. Are you familiar with what has just happened to food banks all over our nation in terms of an announcement about impending deliveries of badly needed surplus food? This, I suspect, will be the focus of your future comments on agriculture, but I mention it as something that has impacted my state, and I suspect yours as well.
Well, first of all, I want to stay disciplined. When you ask me a question, to yield for a question, I want to say I yield for a question while retaining the floor. And I want to say to the colleague, I'm familiar with some of this, but if as a part of a question to me and not anything resembling a colloquy, I will yield for a question while retaining the floor if you have another question.
To my colleague, are you familiar with an article, USDA halts millions of dollars worth of deliveries to food banks?
I'm pretty sure I am. I am.
I will simply then ask my colleague a question.
Therefore, if you were going to ask me a question, I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
To my colleague, I ask the question, are you familiar with the cuts that have been imposed to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, suspending hundreds of millions of meals to Americans in need, and the justification for that being offered?
I am familiar. I've mentioned it earlier in this last 15 hours. So thank you.
Last question.
I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
To my colleague from New Jersey, I ask the question, are you familiar with when, whether, and why NATO has invoked Article 5 and how the service and the sacrifice that followed reinforces exactly the point I believe my colleague was beginning to speak to, which is the common cause and the common purpose shown by all of our NATO allies in America's greatest moment of need in recent decades after the attacks of 9/11.
I am very familiar with that. It haunts me that when America was in crisis, I live 11 miles from ground zero.
And to my colleague, are you aware which of our European NATO allies lost per capita the highest number of their soldiers in combat serving alongside American service members? A nation I visited, a nation whose service members I visited, a nation that is today aggrieved by comments made recently, are you familiar with our trusted ally, Denmark?
Yes, I am. That country that has shed more blood than any of our allies, side by side, fighting with America, is Canada. Is Canada.
Denmark.
Oh, it's Denmark.
Denmark lost per capita, I believe. Excuse me. Let me simply ask of my colleague one more question.
Thank you very much. I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Is my colleague aware that broadly distributed across our NATO allies is service and sacrifice, including the loss of their troops in combat, and that every single loss in combat was a loss of great service and sacrifice by our NATO allies?
Yes, I am familiar, and I'm grateful for you making those points as we threaten Greenland and Denmark and try to bully them in a way that, with rhetoric that fashions more after the behavior of Vladimir Putin's threatening before the Ukrainian invasion, as opposed to what allies do who are grateful for shared sacrifice, who are grateful for shared honor, who are grateful for shared prosperity. What is happening right now to me is shameful. How we're treating our allies is unacceptable, and the tariffs that will be imposed will indeed hurt Canada and other NATO allies, but they will hurt us in the long run more, not only in the immediacy of the driving up of prices for Americans. What the president is doing as he turns his back on Republican traditions and American and Democratic traditions, it's going to hurt us more as a nation in the long run, as other countries look to other places for leadership of the free world.
Will my colleague yield for another question?
I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Is my colleague familiar with the testimony of General Jim Mattis, a decorated four-star Marine Corps general who served as Secretary of Defense in the previous Trump administration, who testified about what the consequences would be if we were to defund development and diplomacy?
I hope that the colleague of mine, who again has been a mentor, a friend on all things foreign policy, my belief is that he's referring to when General Mattis sat before the United States Senate and said very pointedly, if you cut the foreign aid, if you cut organizations like USAID, if you cut the programs of the State Department, then buy me more bullets.
Will my colleague yield for a final question?
I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Does my colleague have an opinion about whether it strengthens or harms America in our national security to have an earned reputation as a nation of compassion, a nation that comes to the aid of those suffering through humanitarian disasters, a nation of compassion that provides health care and access for retirement in decency, a nation that cares for the least of these on the margins of the world and that has a just and inclusive society at home? Does my colleague have an opinion about whether it strengthens or weakens our nation at home and abroad to earn a reputation for compassion and reliability, or instead to deserve a reputation for unreliability and cruelty?
So this is the powerful thing about my friend, who I went with on my first trip to the continent of Africa as a senator. And I remember flying in to Zimbabwe. The leader of that country had passed away. And you always correct me on my pronunciation, so I'm going to try my best. Mnangagwa.
Mnangagwa, yes.
Mnangagwa, thank you, sir.
Mnangagwa.
The alligator, it was his reputation, had taken over as his leadership. And we, this bipartisan merry group of senators, were going there to sit in a unified, bipartisan way and say to this new leader, you need to honor democratic principles, you need to honor free and fair elections, that we want to be your partner, we want to be your friend, but it's time for a new, peaceful, democratic Zimbabwe. And as we landed, I don't know if you remember, he was landing too. in the airport, and he was coming from China. He was coming from China, who has different values than we have. In fact, you and I both see now all over the continent of Africa a competition. We come with USAID, we come with PEPFAR, we come with a program called AGOA, helping with economic development. We come with scientists that stand in the breach against the worst infectious diseases. One of the most courageous things I saw Chris Coons do in my life was when the Ebola scare was happening about 8 years ago, and was starting to show up on our shores. You did something that people were afraid to do. You went to Africa to visit with the people from our country that are there fighting Ebola. You had to come in quarantine when you came back to make sure you didn't have it. It was amazing because you were going there to say to the world, I, Chris Coons, Senator for Delaware, here, but America is here. America knows that an infectious disease anywhere is a threat to public health everywhere. America knows that when it comes to the globe, Martin Luther King was right in his spiritual proclamation in the letters from the Birmingham jail that we are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a common garment of destiny, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I have been to where you've been, from Kenya and Tanzania, to traveling with you to Ouagadougou. You used to make me smile when I used to say the capital of Burkina Faso. Ouagadougou, my friend. There's a word I learned from a language, the Bantu language. It basically roughly translates into this: I am because we are. I am because we are. America has learned the power of soft power. General Mattis knew much cheaper investment, much more success. String of successes that we've had in the last 25 years have been with our soft power, not with our 20-year wars in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. General Mattis knew that. He gave wisdom. He said, do not cut the State Department. Do not cut USAID. They are making an invaluable contribution to fighting terrorism, to fighting instability, to spreading democracy, to fighting infectious diseases, where we go and stand. But now we're shrinking, we're retreating, we're pulling back, we're cutting aid. And when crises are happening like we're seeing in Myanmar right now, we don't even have the personnel to be there to help people. But you know who does? China. And they show up and they leverage influence. You and I know this in the continent of Africa. They're here, take our money, be in debt to us now, and we have control. By the way, we want a military port here, like they have right next to us in Djibouti. The Chinese are playing a long game, and Trump is playing into their hands and weakening our nation, not just against infectious diseases, not just against the global fight against climate change, not just against the economic opportunities that we're missing out on in the continent of Africa. And guess what? If you don't know this, by 2050, 1 out of every 4 people on the planet Earth will live on the continent of Africa. 1 of every 3 working-age people on the planet Earth will be on the continent of Africa. China's playing the long game. Not only critical rare earth minerals, but the economic power of the most populous continent on the planet. And what are we doing with Trump? We're doing Michael Jackson. We're moonwalking away from that continent, saying, China, go ahead. I love you, Chris Coons. I am the ranking member of this subcommittee inspired by you, Chris Coons. And the work that you and me and Lindsey Graham and John McCain did over the last 10 years is being swept away as our allies are saying frightening things that they have to look elsewhere for leadership and not to the people that saved the free world. It is a shame that we're doing to my grandparents' generation. With my grandmother with her war bonds and her victory garden, and my grandfather building bombers at the Willow Run bomber plant in Michigan. All the country came together and sacrificed for the war effort. We saved Europe. We bled and died on that European continent. There are, and you've seen them, these fields of crosses, and you see some stars of David, and you see some Muslim graves, you see it all. Our American boys died. And yet we still invested in that continent. We still invested with the Marshall Plan. We still invested with the Berlin Airlift. We still stood up to communism. And a great Republican president stood up in front of a Russian autocratic leader and said, Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And what is Trump going to be remembered for? I really love Vladimir Putin. Zelensky's a dictator. You're my friend. You and I both visit VA halls. And occasionally we meet a World War II veteran. In my state, there are some incredible men that still wear their hat. And if they can, they stand with pride. They are called the greatest generation. And what are we doing to their legacy? What are we doing to their legacy, Chris Coons? I'm going to keep talking unless somebody wants to say, will the senator yield for a question?
Will the senator yield for a question?
I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
First of all, thank you so much for what you are doing, Senator Booker. You are drawing our nation's attention to what Donald Trump and Elon Musk and DOJ are seeking to do to our country, especially the most vulnerable in our society. And you, Senator Booker, you have been a champion for the poor, for the sick, for the disabled, for those most in need throughout your entire life. That is who you are. You are absolutely a champion for those who need help the most. So as we look at what Donald Trump is proposing, to destroy the Department of Education, just to level it, knowing that Title I money goes to the poorest children in Newark, in Boston, so that they can have as close to an equal footing as is possible so that they too can compete to ensure they enjoy the American dream. To gut Medicaid, knowing that there's 338,000 people just in Massachusetts alone who are on disabilities, who need Medicaid in order to deal with those afflictions which their families need a little bit of help to deal with. To begin a process of saying that Social Security is a Ponzi scheme.
Yes.
And knowing that ultimately they need the billions of dollars for the tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires. And they have to get it out of education. They have to get it out of Medicaid. They have to get it out of veterans benefits. They have to get it out of Social Security. We know what their plot is. The plot is to get $2 trillion out of the programs that affect ordinary people in order to have tax breaks for the wealthiest people in our nation. And most of it will come out of health care. It'll come out of Medicaid, ultimately out of Medicare, out of the Affordable Care Act, out of veterans benefits, health care, health care, health care, health care for every family, for the wealthiest in our society who don't need a tax break. The one thing they don't need right now is a tax break, especially when Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Jeff Zuckerberg now control more wealth than the bottom 50% of our nation combined. Do they really need a tax break? I mean, I know the president put him right behind him at his inauguration, but, oh my God, the cabinet sits behind billionaires? The founding fathers are spinning in their graves, thinking about how they've inverted what is supposed to be the way in which our government, our country works. So I thank you for your incredible leadership. You are putting the spotlight on what is going wrong in this country right now, this oligarchy seeking to take over our nation. So So I thank the senator for what he is doing. It is just so consistent with his whole life, what he stands for. What he stands for on the floor of the Senate today, a conscience for the nation. So can the senator tell the Senate today, the nation, what this could mean if we continue down this path of Donald Trump and Elon Musk and DOJ for those families who need help the most in our society?
I so appreciate the senator, and I want to tell folks, when I wrote my book, I thought I knew this man here, but I did a lot about environmental justice in my book. I did about a lot of these toxic chemicals out there that are threatening our people. And I came to the Senate one day, so humbled, because I told him I knew you as my colleague. We both got here around the same time. But I had no idea of the kind of things you did in the United States House of Representatives, how many bills that made a difference for people's lives in Boston and in Newark and Camden and Passaic. You are one of the people that, after a few years here, I discovered in 2015, writing my book, how amazing your career is. And now, having served in the Senate about the same amount of time, I am so grateful for you. And you have been so consistent in why you came here, not forgetting the people you've been fighting for your whole career. And so your question is right aligned with that point. It was said earlier about this humanity's biggest fight, humanity's biggest consistent theme, us versus them or just us. I don't like when we pit one group in this country against another group. It's not us versus the billionaires or us versus the Republicans. It's understanding what is best for we the people. How can we create a more perfect union? And I will tell you this right now. We are a union in trouble compared to our global peers. We have higher disease rates, higher diabetes rates, higher cancer rates, higher maternal mortality rates, higher premature birth rates, higher infant mortality rates. There are so many things going on in this country that should not go on. But yet we are a nation of utter abundance. We are a nation of incredible wealth and resources. And we've proven in our past to be a nation of incredible vision. And that's why I don't understand why we are playing so small, why we have a president that is playing so small. It's not coming here like presidents of the past and saying, we together, from Reagan to Clinton to Obama, there's a big challenge, America. We together are going to get into the room and do sausage making, Republicans and Democrats, and we're going to find a way to write great legislation. Whatever you want to say about Joe Biden, he was a big president because he didn't try to do things by executive fiat, or as a quote of Donald Trump's I put here, the primacy of the executive, ignoring our Constitution. You know how many bipartisan bills were hammered out here? I see another dear friend of mine, Mark Warner. You know how many bipartisan bills Mark Warner was at the table for? My senior senator who's chairman of Intelligence. We did bipartisan infrastructure act when Trump in his first term had infrastructure week every other week. We did a chips and science bill. He's trying to claw back the money, but we together, I still remember that skiff, that classified skiff where the whole Senate was there and our national security team and Gina Raimondo put forward the crisis in our country, the vulnerabilities, and we came out of that room, we got into our rooms, and we hammered out a great chips and science bill. Decades went by in this body with doing nothing on gun violence. Decades, and courageous people on the Republican side, friends of mine that surprised me, that stood up like Senator Cornyn and said, we're going to do something. I've got my lines, you've got your lines, but let's find the space in the middle. And we did programs, and if you come to New Jersey, the community violence intervention money is lowering murder rates in places like Newark by over 50%, helping to get it done along with our great law enforcement officers. And the incredible thing about that now is Trump is trying to claw back that money, violating the separation of powers, because we decide how we're spending money in America, not the executive. Read the Constitution. And so you and I both know that a big president would come to here and say, let's do some legislation. But John McCain, and I read it in the middle of the night, But John McCain, it's really important, John McCain, I won't read it, but I'll tell it, voted against the health care last time, the taking away of health care for millions of Americans, and said that's because of the dysfunction of this body that we don't come together and do something bigger and bolder to provide better health care, to bring the ideas from both sides and expand the opportunities for Americans and replace the imperfections of the Affordable Care Act with smarter and better things. Not Donald Trump. He's repeating why the mistakes, but not with the ACA, which affects tens of millions of Americans, with Medicaid, that affects 70 to 100 million Americans. Why? You ask why? Well, we know why. There's two things that this will achieve. Two things. One, as you said it is because he wants to not just renew the Trump tax cuts, but expand them that have disproportionate benefits to the wealthiest. And I wish the wealthiest in the country, names that we know, people like Elon Musk would say, I don't want a tax cut. I wish he would say the truth. I don't need a tax cut. But no, that's one of the reasons. He wants to renew a program that gave disproportionate money, but that's not the only reason. There's a cruelty in what he's doing. It's so offensive. He seems to have no respect for people with disabilities. He made fun of a journalist with a disability once. He seems to have no respect for people who are working hard and struggling but still can't make ends meet. No respect for people that are afraid of his language, of his threats. They think that what he's doing to Social Security might mean they don't have it, that what he's saying to Medicare and Medicaid are lies because he's got more registered lies than any president of my lifetime. They don't think they can trust this president not to hurt them because he already is. And so I was told by my parents what defines you as a person is not what happens to you, but how you choose to respond. What happens to us as a nation is not what happens to us. They can bomb us from Pearl Harbor to attack us at 9/11. The American character was defined by how we responded to those crises. And yes, there have been major political crises before, but we responded by bending the arc of our nation more towards justice, taking care of more and more people, saying that we belong to each other in America. It is we the people. It is we the people. I see the standing of my friend, Mark Warner. I don't know if he has a question, but I know what I'm told to say if he asks me to yield for a question.
Will the senator yield for a question?
I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Well, Mr. President, let me join my friend and colleague from Massachusetts. One, to celebrate the senator from New Jersey's endurance, his willingness to continue to make this case in as clear terms as possible. Not having been here last night at 6:30, I do wonder when he started this speechathon at 6:30 whether the bob and the weave and the move was quite as strong, or was he firmly attached to the podium. The fact that you are going on more than 12 hours now and look like you've got hours ahead and hours before you sleep, and knowing that there are other members who've got a question, including the majority leader. I just want to be brief with mine. You've talked a lot with great passion about the damage done domestically. As chairman of the Intelligence Committee, now vice chairman, I have been aghast at the sloppiness of this administration time after time after time in terms of their treatment of classified information. First 2 weeks of the administration, strangely, a couple hundred CIA agents' identities were revealed on a non-classified chain. These probationary employees, means new employees, the American government had spent a couple $100,000 on each of them. You got to get a security clearance, you got to get them trained. Unfortunately, these folks can't deploy abroad. They can't deploy undercover because their names were carelessly put on an unsecured channel. If you say, well, that was just a one-off. Well, what about a week or so later, the Doge boys, they print a whole list of federal properties that should be for sale. They quickly take it down a few hours later, realizing they once again have screwed up. But in putting up that list, they put on classified dark sites that the American government, again, spends millions of dollars to protect. Or more recently as well, the Doge boys, either ignorantly or maliciously, either one just plain stupid, put out the list of a classified agency, its budget, total head count, again, all classified information. And Senator, one thing I can tell you, and I know you know this as well, if this had happened to a line intelligence officer or a line military officer, there'd be no question. Your butt would be fired. Matter of fact, we got information yesterday there had been a DHS employee who had inadvertently put a journalist on a chat line. Guess what happened? The guy's fired. So when it came to this incident, now called Signalgate, or Signalgate fiasco, where you've got the leading members of this administration debating where and how we should bomb the Houthis, including specific information of who will be hit and when. Senator Booker, I was down in Hampton Roads this weekend. These were the communities that surround the Norfolk Naval Station. Norfolk Naval Station is where the Truman, the aircraft carrier, has been deployed from. It is the aircraft carrier that the flights that attacked the Houthis flew off of. I can tell you one thing, Senator Booker, these people were pissed off that there'd been this level of carelessness about their loved ones that if it had gotten in the wrong hands would have cost American lives. So, Senator Booker, as you put down the litanies of all of the challenges that have been raised by this administration, I'll ask you a simple question. Do you agree that this pattern, not one-off, pattern of sloppiness endangers our national security?
Yes, absolutely, yes. I love that you gave that litany, Senator. I have benefited from your leadership on the Intel Committee. You are one of the people that when things go down on the planet Earth, you're one of the small handful of people with the highest security clearance here, you know, before rank and file senators do. And we've had so many conversations about threat matrices and what our enemies are doing. You've sent me to the SCIF and say, I can't talk to you about this. Go down in the SCIF and ask for the information and help me to fill out my understanding of national security threats. I am stunned by this president. All that I've read in the SCIFs about what Russia is doing to this country, I am stunned and angry by this president and what he is doing to us by cozying up to Putin and turning his back on our allies. But the sloppiness, the unqualified leaders that he's put in place, it has caused us to be more at risk. And the Signalgate, you said it. If that had happened under any other president, Republican or Democrat, whoever controlled the Senate would have hearings. They would want to know, was this pattern in practice? Did these signal conversations happen before and we only know about this one because it's somehow you pulled in a journalist? Well, that's a violation of the law because they're disappearing messages. We're destroying government documents that the executive branch has a legal obligation. And the classified materials, putting it out there, first saying, oh, there was nothing classified about that, lying, and then they put out the actual, said, okay, if there's nothing classified, they release the whole thing. And to the wisdom of people like you, and again, more wisdom and experience at Intel than me, it's clearly that was sensitive, probably classified, but we should be having hearings and accountability. I keep going back to how this document is being undermined and attacked by this president. And one of the powers and responsibilities that we swore to uphold, every one of us swore to uphold this, was that we are to be a check on the administration. Before I yield to the next question from Senator Schumer, I want to talk about Senator Schumer. I just want to say something, get it off my chest. Senator Murphy, we've passed the 15-hour mark. I want to thank Senator Murphy in particular because he's been with me the whole night. He hasn't left my side. And in some ways, the debt's repaid. We passed 15 hours because we called Chuck Schumer 9 years ago. 9 years ago. I remember exactly where I was standing when three of us were on the phone and we asked Chuck to help us for you to take the floor right down there and do a filibuster. We didn't know how long it was going to last, but I committed to you that I would be your aide de camp. 15 hours you stood, Chris Murphy, saying that this nation shouldn't do business as usual for the Pulse massacre. And the leader of the Senate 9 years ago said, I support you guys, go ahead. And so one of the first people I called, Senator Schumer, and talked to about this actually was Murphy. And he did full circle for me and has been with me the whole 15 hours. His debt is paid, but I got fuel in the tank, man. And the only reason you stopped wasn't because you couldn't go on anymore. It was because we got a concession from Mitch McConnell. We got a concession to get 2 votes on common sense gun safety that Republicans had put forward, like universal background checks in the past, but we lost that vote. But in both occasions, 9 years apart, once where Murphy was the principal, and now here we had a leader that said, yeah, how can I help? And so I want to thank Senator Schumer before I suspect he might ask me to yield for a question for being a friend, a partner, and one of the first people I turned to with this idea and that encouraged me to go for it, Cory. And so thank you, Chuck Schumer.
Would the senator yield for a question?
I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
And I have 2 questions, frankly. One on Medicaid cuts, which we talked about last night, and one on tariffs. But first, let me say before I get to this question, your strength, your fortitude, your clarity has just been nothing short of amazing. And all of America is paying attention to what you're saying. All of America needs to know there's so many problems, the disastrous actions of this administration in terms of how they're helping only the billionaires and hurting average families. You have brought that forth with such clarity. People from one end of America to the other admire you. Our whole caucus is behind you, and we admire your stamina, your strength, your passion, your intelligence. The list of adjectives could go on. My question first relates to the Medicaid cuts. As we talked about last night, I visited three Republican districts, one in Staten Island, one right on the border of 2 Republican districts in Long Island yesterday, to talk about Medicaid cuts. I went to nursing homes, and it was clear that the Medicaid cuts that are proposed in this proposal, $880 billion in the House, would be devastating. On Staten Island, the nursing home we visited, they love it, Silver Lake Nursing Home, would close. 300 people would lose their jobs, hundreds would be thrown out, and most of them said their children can't take care of them. It's their needs are more advanced. And even some who said their children might be able to take care of them didn't have room in the house, et cetera. So it's affecting, Staten Island's a middle class, voted for Trump. But we made a plea to their congresswoman to not vote for any bill that had these Medicaid cuts and the tax breaks for billionaires. And a lot of the people there it was bipartisan, there were both parties there. We estimated that about 18,000 people total would lose their jobs with these Medicaid cuts, creating a recession on Staten Island. We estimated the harm that would have caused. And so this was devastating. Same thing on Long Island. Again, Republican areas with Republican congresspeople who hold the balance. If those 3 congresspeople alone would say, I'm not voting for a bill that cuts Medicaid to give tax breaks for the billionaires, the bill would fail. So, and I know that you in New Jersey and my colleagues in Massachusetts, Connecticut, and elsewhere are doing the same thing, congressmen and senators, and I've talked to Leader Jeffries, and he's doing the same with his folks. So my question to you is very simple. If these people in New Jersey, in New York, across America, are kicked out of nursing homes, of assisted living facilities, of healthcare facilities, what would they do? How could they, and how does the senator, with his passion and everything else, feel when the only reason they're doing this is give tax breaks to the wealthiest of Americans? Would you please answer my question, sir?
Yes, I will, Leader Schumer. I earlier, or late last night rather, I read dozens and dozens and dozens of letters from terrified people. The stories were heartbreaking as people rendered their pride and gave us insights into the more painful aspects of their lives. I got emotional over one about a person talking about being diagnosed with Parkinson's and know that the disease we get more and more debilitating, like I saw with my father, and demand more and more help, and she was paranoid that the burden on her family, that they couldn't afford it. I had this one amazing letter about a person that said they were the sandwich generation, two 90-something-year-old parents they were taking care of, and two adult men, children with disabilities. And for all of these people, like you saw in the nursing homes, Medicaid wasn't a plus or some kind of abundance heaped upon their lives. It helped them keep the fragile financial world they were living in stable. And then not just an $880 billion cut, Senator Schumer, but even just a half of that or a quarter of that would cut services that would pull apart their whole lives, their ability to care for their loved ones, their ability to still work. One person just said, just the transportation we get through Medicaid for my disabled child is the link that holds it all together. And callously and cruelly, they're talking about this, not in any kind of insightful way, not any kind of, well, here's we can make it more efficient and actually help to keep, none of that kind of thought or logic of bringing in experts, because we read page after page after page of rural hospital leaders, of urban hospital leaders, and more and more and more. So your question is clearly that it is this crazy scheme right now to expand the Trump tax cuts that overwhelmingly, disproportionately go to the wealthiest of us in America who need not our help, that would still yet expand the deficit by trillions of dollars, which means your children, and I know how proud of a grandfather you are, your grandchildren would have to pay for that debt. They're stealing from your grandchildren so that the wealthiest amongst us could get bigger tax cuts, and at the same time taking away medical coverage from the most vulnerable. What is that? It's not who we are. It's not who we are, America. And as much as people, thousands descended on this to save the ACA, Medicaid affects millions and millions of more people. Wake up. They're coming after a vital program for American expectant mothers, for American children, for American disabled, for the seniors like the ones you visited. No, I have one more thing to get off my chest, sir, and this is a little lighter. You heaped so many kind things on me. I don't know if you realize that never before in the history of America has a man from Brooklyn said so many complimentary things about a man from Newark.
But I would remind my colleague that we are both New York Giants fans.
Who play where? In New Jersey. This is not a colloquy. I hold the floor. I do not yield. Brooklyn stole the Nets. It's an injustice from Newark. They stole the Nets. I do not yield the floor for a rebuttal. And the Giants and the Jets play in New Jersey. There's only one football team in New York, and that's the Bills. I do not yield, but I do love and respect. But when I got the floor, I don't have to yield. This is the one time in my life I get the last word with my much more senior, much wiser friend and senator who supported.
My colleague, I do have another question on an unrelated subject.
On a different subject?
Unrelated subject.
Okay, unrelated.
But I will say,
As long as he gives me that commitment, I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
First, let me say before I ask my question, go Bills. Second, given the 15 hours which you've shown such amazing strength of an all-American athlete who could probably, given what you've shown tonight, be a star on our Giants, but so I will not even try to rebut where the Giants are. But I will ask you this question, second. And just going back to before I get to tariffs, one of the leading hospitals in New York told me if there were only a 20% cut of Medicaid, less deep than they showed, that they would close. They're the only cancer care place in the Bronx, 1.3 million people, and they give great care. They're the only one. They would close. So the devastation of these cuts, the American people should realize, is just enormous from one end of the country to the other. In middle-class communities and upper-middle-class communities like Long Island, middle-class like Staten Island, poor communities like the Bronx. But on tariffs, let me ask a question. So here we are, right on the edge of April 2nd. Today's April Fool's Day, but the tariffs that the President is proposing, unfortunately, are not part of an April Fool's trick. They're real and they're devastating. And my question to my colleague, with these tariffs, which is estimated would cost the American family $6,000 more on average, would raise costs on everything across the board, and would throw devastation into our economy. Look at the stock market. It goes down when Trump's serious about tariffs, and it goes up when he says, well, maybe he's not so serious. And with the chaos that is caused, so businesses, which love certainty, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, large businesses, need certainty. So my questions are these. Does the great senator and great Giants fan from New Jersey agree that prices could go way up, all the way up to as much as $6,000? And does he agree that the chaos from Trump's tariffs is discombobulating the economy in very serious ways? And again, does he agree that the reason that they seem to be doing this, they count the revenues? This guy Navarro seems to have no sense of reality, and yet he seems to be in charge. And they count the revenues to help them get more tax cuts for the wealthy. Almost everything they do, including tariffs, it seems to me, is aimed at getting those tax cuts for the wealthy, which, God bless the wealthy, as I've heard you say last night when we spoke. We're not against people who make a lot of money. God bless them, but they don't need a tax break.
No, they don't.
They should realize the beauty of America helped them become or stay billionaires. The money we invested in education, in roads, in schools, in helping kids get food makes a better workforce. So my question to my colleague on these tariffs, A, does he agree that it could raise the price on an average family thousands of dollars? It's estimated $6,000. Does he agree that the chaos caused by Trump's on again, off again, this country, this much, that much, this product, that product, is hurting the economy and hurting business people do their jobs? And does he agree that it seems the motivation is tax breaks for the wealthiest people?
So
Could you please answer my question?
I will,
yield
Leader
back
Schumer.
to him.
I will. So you and I both know that in 72 days now, it's the next day, the 72 days that Trump has been in office, he has caused havoc on the American economy, especially given the economy he inherited. Inflation is up. Prices are up. Consumer confidence is down. The stock market and people's 401ks and retirement plans are down. He continues to do things to rattle confidence, to raise prices, and to hurt not the billionaires, the people that can afford these things, to hurt average Americans who find housing prices too high and it difficult to make ends meet. Every time, and I've looked at the tariffs throughout history. In fact, one of my friends sent me this really funny clip I hope somebody will put up for me from, I think it was Ferris Bueller's Day Off, where he was talking about tariffs and was like, Bueller, Bueller. The reality is, or maybe it was another movie, I'm mixing it up. It shows my pop, what's that?
Entitled after
Thank you,
15
right
hours.
now. But the tariffs haven't worked out for Republican presidents who tried them during the Depression. The evidence is here. Learn from our history.
Does my colleague remember the names of Smoot and Hawley?
Smoot and Hawley. Yes, sir. I definitely remember those names from high school history. God bless you, Mr. Al Gore and Ms. Saru. So yes, what he's going to do tomorrow is going to rattle the markets. What he's going to do tomorrow is raise prices for Americans. What he's going to do tomorrow is lie to folks and say that this is something that China will pay or whomever will pay, when actually it's the American consumers that will pay with higher prices and more economic insecurity. This man, I tell you this quote that Frederick Douglass once said. This I do remember. He said, "The limits of tyranny is prescribed by the endurance of those who are oppressed." How much more will we take of this? How much more will we as America say, cut our Medicaid to give tax cuts to the billionaires? Take the Affordable Care Act and take away tax credits, take away enrollment support. Hey, come after Social Security, cut thousands of people, make customer service get worse, as said the Wall Street Journal. How much more of these indignities will we take as he turns our back on our allies? How much more? How much more of a person that is doing tyrannical things as he takes our Constitution and continues to trash it, as he's running into judge after judge after judge that's trying to stop him, but we've already seen that he wants to ignore judges, or if he gets real rulings he doesn't like, he trashes the judges. And even the Chief Justice appointed by a Republican says to him, no, no, this is not right, this is not who we are, this is not how we do things in America. How much more can we endure before we, in a collective chorus of conviction in our country, say enough is enough? Enough is enough. You're not going to get away with this.
I thank the gentleman for his fortitude, his strength, and the crystalline brilliance by which he has shown the American people the huge dangers that face them with this Trump, Doge, Musk administration. I yield the floor back to my colleague in New Jersey.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. President,
I recognize the senator from Massachusetts, but I think you have to ask him for a question.
Mr. President, will the senator yield for a question?
I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Thank you. I am very grateful to the senator from New Jersey for coming to the floor for such an extended period of time to give voice to all of those around this country whose voices evidently are not heard by the Republicans in the United States Congress. And I wanted to ask a question for the 73 million people who are beneficiaries of the Social Security system and for their families, for the people whose grandma is getting Social Security, for the people whose cousin, whose dad died, who is getting Social Security benefits, about what's happening right now between Donald Trump and Elon Musk, our current co-presidents, and what they're trying to do to the Social Security system. So I start this question with just a basic observation. Social Security is not charity. It is not something we give away to those who are less fortunate, and we do this out of the goodness of our hearts. Social Security is a contract that people who work in America pay into the system for all of their working lives, and when the time comes that they retire or something happens to them and they are not able to do that work, that they can count on the Social Security system and the payments that they are legally entitled to. I want to underscore here, legally. Now, if America wanted to change that contract, the place they have to go is right here, to Congress.
Yes.
They have to come to the United States Senate, or they have to go to the House of Representatives, and they have to say, we actually want to change benefits for Social Security recipients. And by the way, that has happened dozens and dozens of times in our history, up through the late 1980s. where we made adjustments in the Social Security benefits. For example, for the fact that people lived longer, for the fact that people worked longer. And so we made minor adjustments in the system. We also made adjustments to make sure that there were cost of living changes in how much Social Security would pay out. So anyone who wants to change the benefits that people are legally entitled to has to come here to Congress and make that happen. But it appears that Elon Musk and Donald Trump have tried to figure out an end run. And the end run is to say, okay, we can't directly change benefits, but what we can do is we can effectively cut off benefits. Now, how can they do that? Well, one way is fire all the people who help people get their Social Security benefits. And think of it this way. Someone who wants to collect Social Security, let's just say at age 66, they decide, okay, I'm ready. It's time for me to retire. I can't do this anymore. I want to collect my Social Security benefits. And they try to fill out the form. Turns out it gets rejected. There's a number off somewhere in the system. Somebody's got a confusion over what the name is or where somebody worked, or an employer from decades back failed to fill out the right form. So now there's a problem in the system. So what does the person do? Well, first they might try calling. But if you fired the people who answered the phones, that's not going to work. Okay, so what's the next thing you do? You go to your local Social Security office. Oh, but if they've closed the Social Security office near you, that's not going to work. So what do? You go to the Social Security office that you can find. 2 hours away, 3 hours away, 4 hours away. Finally, get to that Social Security office, and when you get there, if they fired most of the people, you may encounter, what, 2 people working the desk to help straighten out problems, and a line that's 50 people long. By the way, these come from real stories. People are telling what's happening out there. So, by the time the day is over, our example here hasn't even made it to the front of the line. So, doesn't get the question answered, doesn't get the problem resolved. Has to go back home again, has to find somebody who can maybe take him to the Social Security office that's hours away and start this process over and over and over. If this person, let's just say, for example, takes 3 months to get this problem ultimately resolved by the Social Security Administration, they don't get the money. That money is lost. It just simply is gone. They do not get the money they are legally entitled to, and they have no right to go back and collect it, even pointing out that it was Social Security's error. So failure to correct these errors, or to give people an opportunity to correct these errors, is effectively the same as having cut their benefits. And you do that for 1% of the people, drive up your error rate. You do that for 5% of the people. You do that for 10% of the folks who are getting Social Security. And man, those cuts really start to add up. They really start to add up for the people whose benefits are cut. They really start to add up for Donald Trump and for Elon Musk. But let's look at another possibility here, and that is just simply delay. Checks don't go out on time. When checks don't go out on time, then the promise that people relied on, that check would come on the 3rd of the month, that's what they count on for rent, that's what they count on to put groceries on the table, that's what they count on to support themselves, it's gone. So maybe they'll get the check next month. Another billionaire Republican, Howard Lutnick, said, don't worry about it. His mother-in-law would simply count on the fact that they'd straighten the problem out, and maybe next month she would get her payment. I suppose if your son-in-law is a billionaire, you can count on the fact that somebody will make sure your rent gets covered and groceries on the table. But for the 70 million Americans relying on that check coming in every month, not so clear what you're going to do. So what do you do? Do you borrow money to make rent? Do you call on relatives if you've got them? Who do you go to be able to make it to the end of this month, and if the problem persists, to the next month and the next month? Where do you go? That is, in my view, as much a benefit cut as Congress having voted to say we're just going to give a 10% across the board cut to everyone who receives Social Security benefits. There are a lot of ways to cut benefits, and breaking your promise to 73 million Americans is a benefit cut. It is not a legal benefit cut, but it is an effective benefit cut. And I admire the senator from New Jersey for being here today to speak out for those Americans who face these kinds of cuts and have no recourse. I admire him for standing up and saying to the Republicans who won't go do town halls, who won't go out and meet with these people and listen to them, listen to their concerns, listen to their fears, listen to their stories about what happens as thousands and thousands more Social Security employees are fired, and correcting problems, straightening out your benefits gets harder and more out of reach for more and more Americans. That is what we face right now. So the question that I want to pose to the senator from New Jersey is this. At a time when Donald Trump and Elon Musk are looking for an indirect way to cut Social Security benefits, and let's just pause here, if I can, to say, why?
Yes.
Why go out of your
Yes.
way to cut Social Security benefits? Come on now. 73 million Americans rely on this. This has been the backbone of America's promise to its own people, that you did the work, you put in the money, and now you're entitled to the benefit on the other side. Why are they doing this? Because they want to reduce the amount of money that is available for Social Security and instead take that money over so that they can advance tax cuts for billionaires and billionaire corporations. They're just trying to grease the skids here for the billionaires to get even richer and ask the 73 million Americans who rely on Social Security to pay for it out of their own hides. So the question I have for the senator from New Jersey is, when Elon Musk and Donald Trump are determined to try to use a backdoor way to cut Social Security benefits, A, are they acting legally? And B, how do we put a stop to this?
Yeah, amen, amen. You know, Reverend Warnock was here earlier and was preaching and quoting scripture, but you are preaching a gospel of truth, my friend, from a civic gospel that speaks to the cares and the concerns of the American hope and the American dream and the American Constitution, because you and I both know the answer to the question. I have to say, for folks who are watching, she is the great senator from Massachusetts, but she used to be a professor in New Jersey. She was a Rutgers professor. I was listening to her way before I got to the Senate, when she was fighting for the CFPB, when she was fighting so people would not be taken advantage, was establishing the first ever agency whose sole purpose is to stand up to big banks, to big corporate powers, and defend people, an institution that got billions and billions of dollars back into the pockets of the American consumer. And what did Donald Trump and DOJ do to an institution that we set up in Congress in a bipartisan way? They did something that is against the Constitution and went after to hack it to pieces so that it's no more. But add insult to injury, down here, we just had a vote on overdraft fees that was stunning to me because there's just no defense of it. It was a clear thing. Some of the big banks said, you know what, we don't need those usury fees, it's actually wrong. Some of the big banks just stood up and said, did the right thing, but a handful of others were still taking advantage of people, and this Senate got to vote, which side are you on? And we failed. So your question is right. You detail what is right, how people are getting hurt already, how the benefits of Social Security are already being affected, how rural places, Social Security offices are being closed already. And the question of why, under the guise of efficiency, but you're hurting our elders who deserve dignity in their retirement. It's stunning to me, Senator Warren, stunning to me that we're actually even having this discussion and having this debate when there's been not one congressional hearing about what Elon Musk is doing. The letters I read earlier about Social Security were painful because people wanted to know what was being done with their most confidential and private information. I want to continue because we were working through national security, and given the time, I want to rush to just read some stories of voices. I wanted to come to the floor and read people's voices, elevate voices. And so here's a voice, a statement from Julia Hurley from Bergen County, New Jersey. Thank you, Julia, I see you. My family's roots are deep in New Jersey, all the way back to my great-grandparents, with my mom's side from Bogota, Fair Lawn, and Upper Saddle River, and my dad's side from Spring Lake and Wall Township. I have north and south roots. My grandfather started a manufacturing company that my cousin still runs, and my other grandfather ran a trucking company based in New Jersey. I was born and raised in Park Ridge and learned from a very young age about the importance of serving and community. Both of my grandfathers served in World War II. What a family. My family was always involved in charity and our churches, and ever since I can remember, I wanted to help people, doing my first fundraiser for homeless people in Bergen County when I was maybe 8 or 9. The passion for service took an international bent after I went abroad for the first time during an exchange trip to Germany with Park Ridge Junior Senior High School in 2001 and fell in love with travel. Shortly after that, September 11th happened. 7 people from my little town were killed in the towers, and we could see the smoke from ground zero from a hill in the next town over. For those of you who don't know, Park Ridge is very close to where I grew up, and my childhood best friend died in the towers. This was when I learned how my little suburban bubble could be impacted by things worlds away. I became obsessed with trying to help and wanting to drive a career that would be in service to my country and people elsewhere so that we would be more inclined, so those people would be more inclined to work with us than against us. I went on to study diplomacy and international relations at Seton Hall University, graduating magna cum laude and determined to work for the State Department at some point. My 15-year winding career path after that took me into the advocacy space and onto humanitarian and peace-building work in Gaza with the UN, as well as in Tunisia and Egypt. In 2022, after a year as a policy advisor with the International Committee of the Red Cross, I was recruited to join USAID. And I couldn't have been more excited. This was a dream job, an opportunity to serve my country and impact policy in a real way, sharing what I had learned from working abroad and at home to shape U.S. foreign policy and efforts to advance development and humanitarian assistance on the ground. I was eventually promoted to a senior policy advisor role in USAID's Office of Policy, where I was developing policy that was shaping the way USAID worked, trying to break down silos across the agency to be more effective and efficient in our response to some of the toughest crises in the world. I got the opportunity to not only prepare talking points for high-level events and for our leadership, but even brief the administrator a couple times. That all came crashing down around January 28th as my colleagues began being terminated and furloughed. I went into the Trump administration like any other bureaucrat, ready to engage and help because I want every administration I want every administration to succeed and lean on us as experts to help advance American policy. I worked with our team, and I briefed our political appointee director, who started on Inauguration Day, and hoped to see what I could do to continue building on the reform work I had been doing for a year at that point. Instead, everything quickly unraveled. Elon Musk called USAID a criminal organization that should die, he said. And the President of the United States deemed us radical left lunatics. I was terrified, afraid of what people might do when two of the most powerful men in the world were saying things like that. Our jobs were then in question, and the USAID offices were quickly closed, with our belongings still in them. We were left not knowing what our fate would be for weeks. As DOJ dismantled USAID, I watched in horror as the programs shut down. The people we served suffered. And friends and colleagues from the agency and our partner organizations lost their livelihoods and their mission-driven careers. On March 14th, I was finally terminated. I've been heartbroken since, shifting between deep depressions and rage. Because of the sledgehammer approach that DOJ took, the entire foreign assistant architecture was broken. Organizations I would have gone on to work for are going bankrupt, cutting staff, and definitely not hiring. I spent 15 years building up this career that I loved beyond words. Every time I would leave my late father while he was dying in a hospital in 2012, he would tell me to go save the world. This wasn't just a career. It was a calling to serve. I have no idea what I will do next. In some ways, I feel lucky because I got married last May, God bless you, and am on my husband's health insurance, thank God. But he also works for the government, and he could be riffed with a moment's notice. I also have a supportive family who will help me if it really gets bad. But the uncertainty has probably been one of the most painful parts of all of this, not knowing what will come next and just fearing it will be worse than the day before. All we wanted to do was serve. I want to say thank you to Julia Hurley from Bergen County, my home county in New Jersey. Thank you for your voice. Thank you for laying your pain plain and your anger, making it real in my heart as I know it's in yours. I stand for you today. Personal statement from Catherine Baker from Neptune, New Jersey. I have been furloughed from my job at USAID implementing partner since February 14th, 2025. I have 13 years experience supporting USAID contractors in business development and recruitment efforts, mostly in conflict and post-conflict settings. The following is how I got here today. I was born in Neptune and raised there until I went to college. My father is a lifelong Neptune resident whose Jersey roots date all the way back to the early 1700s. Wow. When my Scottish ancestors came here in search of religious freedom and economic opportunity and helped build much of what is Gloucester and Mercer counties. My mother is an immigrant born in Coro, Venezuela, to refugees escaping fascism bombs and economic ruin in Spain and Sicily. Every summer, my mom and I traveled to Venezuela to see her mother, my aunts and uncles, and countless cousins. Coro, the capital of Venezuela's state, responsible for most of oil refining, sits on the Caribbean coast and is about 15 minutes plane ride from Aruba, surrounded by sand dunes. Our family friends lived in homes with dirt floors, corrugated aluminum roofs, and a hose out back you would use to shower while fending off the chickens that roamed freely. Coro is a city in constant drought. We would get water every other day, and you'd use a trash bin filled with water and a ladle to shower on your non-water days. Coro, as you could imagine, couldn't be more different from Neptune, New Jersey. I went to high school, I went to St. James Elementary and Red Bank Catholic High School in Red Bank from kindergarten through 12th grade. If 13 years of Catholic school teaches you anything, it's the importance of taking care of one another, especially those that are suffering from poverty, famine, and disease. I remember being given a small cartons when we were tasked with filling with spare change so that we could ship them off to some faraway place where we were told stories of children just like us who were facing unimaginable hardships. I was so moved by the notion that a child, not so different from myself, didn't have enough to eat or had lost their parents in a conflict I couldn't begin to understand. My senior year at RBC, I took a class called Globalization and Social Justice. The class was taught by a longtime family friend, Mary Logan, herself a former nun. Miss Logan taught us about the Rwandan genocide and had us watch Hotel Rwanda as a class. She made sure we knew the reasons why this happened, understood how dehumanization and hatred can lead to mass torture and executions, and critiqued the international response to the genocide that led to nearly 1 million deaths in 100 days. That year, Miss Logan took us to Keene University to see Nick Kristof speak about Darfur and made sure we knew the signs of genocide when we saw it. How can we let this happen again, we asked her. I wore my Save Darfur green rubber bracelet and t-shirt everywhere I went. What could I, a kid living at the Jersey Shore, do to help? During this period of enlightenment led by Miss Logan, the Mary Knoll missionaries funded school in Kibera, Kenya, that we were supporting was threatened by electoral violence in December of 2007. We received letters from the nuns there. We were Miss Logan's personal friends. We received letters from nuns there who were Miss Logan's personal friends about how the fires nearly reached the school and the children who were already living in Africa's largest slum stood poised to lose the little they had, including their lives. Upon returning from Christmas break, Mary Knoll Affiliates Club sprang into action. We raised awareness and funds and proudly sent money from bake sales and door knocking to our friends in Kenya. We received media attention from WCBS in New York, and our story got picked up by other channels and newspapers. I was amazed that my efforts in Monmouth County were having such meaningful and real impact on a crisis happening thousands of miles away. I was passionate about this work. I was seemingly good at it, or as good as an 18-year-old could be. Could I actually turn this into a career? Could I help even more people across the world? I'd like to think I did that. I'd like to think I did that. And I'm crying as I write this because I wonder if I ever will do it again. The past 10 years, I've focused on conflict prevention, stabilization, preventing, countering violent extremism, and citizen security in conflict or post-conflict areas. Not only did I conduct desk research and analyze problem sets from behind a desk, but I got to travel to those countries and meet with local governments, civil society organizations, and advocacy groups to hear from them about the issues and discuss solutions. I spoke with survivors of the devastating 2004 tsunami in Sri Lanka and Tamils whose fathers and brothers disappeared during the Civil War and are likely burned in unmarked graves somewhere on the island. I worked closely with a woman my age whose families fled Kosovo to the United States during the war when we were about 9 years old and returned as soon as she could to her home country to promote continued peace between Albanians and Serbs. My recent trips to Kosovo were so illuminating, not because of the pain or struggle of these people, but because of the respect and admiration and gratitude they had towards the United States of America. Anyone who has been to Pristina knows of the Bill Clinton and Bob Dole statues. I didn't know about that. As well as the Hillary Boutique. A few years ago, when I was negotiating an employment offer with a Ghanaian candidate for a USAID-funded Preventing Violent Extremism program, I couldn't meet his salary expectations. He said to me, "That's okay. I will take whatever you can give me. If the United States will make sacrifices for the people of Ghana in support of this program, I'm willing to make a sacrifice too with a pay cut." He proudly accepted the offer. The recognition of these funds could be spent elsewhere was not lost on him. Generosity and kindness are always more greatly appreciated by those who have less. All but one of my company's USAID contracts, which totaled nearly $400 million, were terminated almost overnight by DOGE. Over 80% of our Virginian-based office was laid off or furloughed. I bought my first condo last year, a milestone we all strive for, but too few people my age are able to achieve. I applied to 60 jobs in 1 month, all of which I'm qualified for. I have received 2 interview requests. This after being a sought-after professional in my industry with a strong network cultivated through years of hard work. This has ruined me. My mortgage payment isn't what makes me cry, though. It's our local staff and partners that come to mind every night as I say my prayers. My colleague, a Sudanese refugee living in Kampala, working on a terminated USAID peace-building program from Sudan, texts me every week to ask how I'm doing. He called me to make me smile because he knew I was crying. He now calls me Sad Eyes, and has made it his mission to never see tears fall from these lashes again. I obviously lie to him and say mission accomplished, but it will never be true. Not only is the United States not stronger, not safer, not more prosperous, but the beacon of our democracy grows dim across the globe. Without leadership, other countries hostile to the United States will step in and innocent people will continue dying. When I close my eyes, the specter of very real people from my travels and projects appear, and I hear the echoes of suffering they shared with me. Suffering they were sure to know was alleviated, however temporarily, by the United States of America through USAID. And wherever they could, they would thank me. Whatever they could, they would thank me and America. They would thank me and America for it. Thank you, Catherine Baker from Neptune, New Jersey. And Catherine, I see you. I see you, Catherine. I hear you. I stand for you. But I want to share something with you. One of the most extraordinary trips I've had as a United States Senator was to Chad, to go up to the border of Chad and Sudan and see the horrors. I've been to refugee camps all around the globe, but see the horrors of what was happening again in Sudan. You wore that Save Darfur t-shirt in your earlier days, but the ethnic cleansing is going on right now. I've never seen so many malnourished babies, barely able to hold up their heads, people fleeing tyranny, and they fled across the border to meet Americans, because we were there. With less than 1% of the American budget, we were there, standing for our values, our highest ideals, our faith traditions, the understanding that when we are out there making the world safer, responding to crises, not only were people seeing the help they need, but they saw the light and the beacon of this democracy. And it pains me that Chris Coons comes down here and shares the headlines from today's newspaper that in Myanmar, in this horrific earthquake, the agency that used to respond to that tragedy, that human tragedy, doesn't have the resources. America's not there. It's a void. And then Chris Coons says in the article I'm surely to read today or tomorrow, whenever I can't stand anymore, he says, who fills that vacuum? Who showed up? But the PRC, China showed up. Less than 1% of our budget, less than 1% of our budget, And people like the folks I read whose whole life, all they wanted to do was to be the light of the American torch of freedom and hope to the world, and they had the rug pulled out from under them. But here's what's worse, because we've had, Chris Murphy, we've had meetings with some of the people behind the scenes that are savagely cutting. And the stories are horrible. People in dangerous places that we sent there having their emails cut, having their phones turned off, pregnant women who don't know how they're going to get out of those areas. And James Mattis, as we discussed, said if you cut these kind of programs, buy me more bullets, because there'll be more instability. There'll be more political democracies being overthrown. There'll be more terrorism. There'll be more violence. And we are old enough as a nation in 250 years to know that if we don't meet these terrors abroad, they will visit us at home. As Chuck Schumer said, I was there watching the towers come down. And in the Sahel, before I do this in Africa, that's the threat. In Togo, in Ghana, in Benin, the northern parts of the country, they're fighting terrorism. Oh, God, yes, I will. I yield for a question while retaining the floor. Chris Murphy.
We have a few more colleagues who are going to join us before the top of the hour. But I just wanted you to round this out and ask you the question this way. Often when we talk about the withdrawal of USAID from the world, the withdrawal of the United States from international bodies like the WHO, the beneficiary is China. But I think you were hinting, as you talked about the African continent, that the threat is much broader than that, because USAID is not just doing counter-China programming, it's also doing counter-extremism programming. In Lebanon, for instance, it's doing the primary work to push back against Hezbollah's political influence there. It's doing work to counter Russian influence around its periphery. And so isn't it the case, Senator Booker, that as USAID is pulled off the playing field, for reasons we still don't understand, that it is all of our adversaries, state adversaries and non-state adversaries, who are tragically celebrating at this opening that we have given them to gain additional influence?
Senator Murphy, that is correct. You've been one of the most articulate voices for this decision. I shouldn't even call it decision, this reckless trashing of USAID, this vilification of the proud men and women that stand in Ebola outbreak, that stand against terrorism, that stand against hardships and ethnic cleansing, that stand against malnutrition. You're so good at pointing out that those are American interests, and that not to do that makes this a more dangerous and unsafe world. A world where countries like ours want to lob missiles into Yemen post facto of crises. So I hear you, Chris Murphy, and I answer your question with a simple understanding that what you're saying is right, and I'm going to tell you that I've got so many other to read, but we are way behind the schedule of where we wanted to be at this point. We're way behind at about 16 hours and 24 minutes. And so to obey my staff, as senators are told to do, I want to move quickly to just the housing issues. Oh, I'm sorry, unless, of course. So I want to move quickly to housing and start really with the theme of affordable housing. Again, we keep returning to the economy and how the Trump administration is making things worse in every area, especially for people struggling. And so let me be clear that for decades, under Democrat and Republican presidents, it's become increasingly difficult for working class Americans to afford a home. In recent years, this nationwide housing affordability crisis for so many Americans has nearly reached a breaking point. The crisis now impacts nearly all Americans shared across all demographics, regardless of partisan identification, race, age, gender, education, or whether you own or rent your home. We in America are in a housing crisis. According to the Center for American Progress, 80% of Americans living in rural communities believe housing affordability is getting worse, while 72% of residents in urban areas feel the same way. In October 2024, the Center for American Progress found no matter your zip code, the goal of home ownership in America is drifting further out of reach all across the country. Over the past 2 decades, housing costs have dramatically outpaced income growth in the United States, increasing the rent burden, heightening barriers to home ownership. The Housing Price Index, a gauge of how selling prices for single-family homes have changed over time, was more than 50% higher in July 2024 than it was in July 2019. According to the Brookings Institution, the U.S. housing market was short 4.9 million housing units in 2023 relative to the mid-2000s. Decades of policy at the federal, state, and local level have all contributed to this reality. Let's not blame some rank partisanship. It's been decades in the making. There are far too homes in the United States, and there are far too homes being built in the United States. The cost of housing keeps rising, rents continue to skyrocket, median home prices are on the rise, which makes it harder and harder for families to make ends meet. The vast majority of young Americans are hard-pressed to save for the chance of one day having enough for a down payment to buy a home. Almost half of all renters in America struggle to pay their rent. Almost half of all renters are struggling to pay the rent, devoting more than 1/3 of their income to housing costs. Since the pandemic, rents have jumped more than 12% year over year. Hidden rental fees and other expenses on already cost-burdened tenants continue to mount as landlords assume more and more power and leverage, leaving tenants and prospective home buyers with nowhere to turn. Last year, NPR methodically walked through the supply shortage that's impacting our country. But before I read this article, I see that my colleague, my friend, extraordinary leader from Maryland is here, and I think he has a question for me first.
Will the senator yield for a question?
I will yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Well, I want to thank my friend, and I want to start by thanking the senator from New Jersey, the senior senator of New Jersey, for shining a spotlight on what is happening in our country at this moment, and specifically what is going to be happening here in the United States Senate later this week or next. And I have a question for the senator, but I want to take some of the threads of what you've been saying as I put this to you, because you are shining a light on the great betrayal. And that is candidate Trump went all over the country saying that he was going to be a president for the forgotten Americans, that he was going to be a president that looked out for working people. And he said he was going to focus on bringing costs down and prices down in the United States of America. And yet, ever since he was sworn in, he has done just the opposite. Prices are going up, including, as the senator was talking about, housing prices. Affordable housing is a crisis in this country. And yet we see Elon Musk and his Doge cronies cutting deeply into affordable housing programs over at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. We see also, and tomorrow he calls it Liberation Day, it's actually going to be sales tax increase day. There was testimony that we've got in the Banking and Housing Committee that when you increase these tariffs on Canada, as he's proposed to do, not in a targeted way, but in an across-the-board way, according to the National Association of Home Builders, that will increase housing prices for Americans up to 10% more at a time we're already facing an affordable housing crisis. And of course, the folks who benefit the most are those billionaires who are part of his cabinet and others in the hedge fund industry who are going out and buying up a lot of houses, not because they need the house for their family, but because they want to flip it at a big profit, making it even less affordable to the American people. So the housing crisis is one part of what is getting even worse because of the actions of Donald Trump and Elon Musk. And it's part of this greater theme of the great betrayal. And later this week, Republicans here in the Senate say they're planning to bring to the floor what we call a budget resolution, which is a framework that will be providing for very big tax cuts for the ultra-rich Americans, tax cuts for big corporations, some of which are offshoring all of their profits. Senator Wyden and I were on the floor just last week talking about how Pfizer has half of its sales revenues here in the United States, but books none of its profits here, and therefore by this scheme called round tripping, where you sort of push your money around the world, they lower their taxes, which means the American people get shortchanged. So all of this is part of a scheme to provide tax cuts for the very wealthy at everybody else's expense. And the senator from New Jersey has been shining a light on what it means when we say this will come at the expense of other Americans, that this tax cut for the very rich and big corporations will come at the expense of the rest of America. So I want to amplify that as I do a wind-up to the senator. Number one, it's Elon Musk and the Doge operation. Let me be very clear that this is part of the most corrupt bargain we've seen in American history. Elon Musk spent $280 million to help elect Donald Trump president, and Donald Trump has turned the keys to the federal government over to Elon Musk, not for efficiency, but to rig the government in favor of people like Elon Musk. That's why they want to get rid of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. This is a bureau that has returned billions of dollars to Americans who were cheated by scam artists. And they are coming in to dismantle the CFPB because they want to be on the side of the scam artists and deny American consumers the benefit of getting their dollars back when they've been cheated. So this has nothing to do with government efficiency. It has to do both with rigging the government for people like Elon Musk and trying to lay the groundwork, claiming lots of cuts that they will then use to pay for, they say, tax cuts for the very rich. So who's being cut by Elon Musk? I don't know, Senator, if you saw the other day in the sort of spin room at the White House, did you catch that, where Elon Musk and some of his folks were explaining the work they did? They said, we're really doing this with a scalpel. Well, the reason that's especially interesting is it was just weeks earlier that Elon Musk brandished a chainsaw.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yes.
At CPAC, which is actually, they met over here in my state of Maryland. That's what they're doing. They're taking a chainsaw, and they're taking a chainsaw to departments that help our veterans. These are people who care for our veterans, and our veterans are being especially hard hit, including when they did these firings, arbitrary firings, right, of probationary employees. And veterans were saying, why are we being hit so hard? And the White House spokesperson said, and I'm quoting, perhaps they're not fit to have a job at the moment. That was the response from one of the White House spokespersons, as if individuals who'd served our country in the military were not fit to serve our government as civilians. That's the kind of attitude we've got. We just learned today that the RIFs, the reductions in force letters, were received by folks in the Department of Health and Human Services. So these are people who help with the public health of all Americans. And they do important work at FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, right? They make sure that the foods that we eat and the medicines we take are safe, and that they do what they say they're going to do in the case of medicines. They do work at NIH, the National Institutes of Health, to develop cures and treatments for diseases that hit every American family, and they're cutting there. They're cutting in these places not for government efficiency, but to create what they believe is the space for tax cuts for the very rich. We talked about what they're doing over the Department of Health, the Department of Housing and Urban Development. At the Social Security Administration, which, by the way, has its headquarters in my state of Maryland, we have thousands of workers who are there to deliver hard-earned benefits to the American people. And the reality is that the Social Security Administration operates incredibly efficiently. You know, the former Commissioner for Social Security, Martin O'Malley, reminds us that Allstate Insurance Company operates at an 11% overhead. Liberty Mutual operates at a 23% overhead. The Social Security Administration, 0.5% overhead. The Social Security Administration workforce is now at a very low level in terms of personnel compared to what it was years ago, and yet they're serving a record number of Americans, 73 million Americans, and they've never missed a payment. Never missed a payment. So this talk about going after Social Security and they're going to somehow make it more efficient, and of course Elon Musk called it a Ponzi scheme, when the senator and I know it's not a Ponzi scheme, it's a promise to the American people. So first they discontinued telephone service, as if all the seniors could somehow just connect, you know, with by Wi-Fi or whatever it may be. A lot of people, of course, rely on telephones, so they cut that. They said, well, if you have trouble, go to one of the local regional Social Security offices. Well, they're cutting regional Social Security offices, lots of them. And then when you go there and you don't find many people there, well, you know, whoops, we just cut 7,000 people from Social Security. So a benefit isn't meaningless if you can't actually access the benefit. And what they're doing is making it harder for Americans to get those benefits. So when we hear about the Musk Doge operation, make no mistake, not about efficiency. It's about trying to put together some kind of savings that they then want to use to at least partially pay for tax cuts for the very rich. Another way they're doing that, we've heard a lot about that, and the senator's spoken about it, is cutting Medicaid and food nutrition programs. In fact, I think we recall a number of weeks ago, we had a couple of amendments here on the floor of the Senate saying, okay, if you're going to do these tax cuts, at least don't cut Medicaid or Medicare or food and nutrition programs. Every Republican senator voted against those amendments. In other words, not to protect those programs, meaning they're fair game for big cuts to pay for tax cuts for the very wealthy. So that's another area where they're very focused, which is cutting important programs that benefit millions and millions of Americans. There's another way they're doing it, and Senator from New Jersey, and again, thank you for shining a light on all this, has talked about it, which is these across-the-board tariffs, right? So I think all of us know that strategically targeted tariffs, they can be useful at certain points in time to protect strategic American industries. I'm for those. But across-the-board tariffs, and across-the-board tariffs on a friend and ally like Canada or Mexico, all that is a tax increase on the American people. Let's be clear. So these are the areas where Donald Trump, having said that he was going to be there for working people, is doing the opposite, right? These across-the-board tariff cuts are going to increase costs and prices for the American people. cutting Medicaid and food nutrition programs is going to hurt the very people that Donald Trump on the campaign trail said he was fighting for. And the DOJ Musk operation is taking a chainsaw to important services and important consumer protections that benefit all Americans in order to claim that they're providing some savings for tax cuts for the rich. So it wasn't that long ago that just down the hall here, Donald Trump was sworn in as president. And I remember what he said. He said, this is going to be a golden age for America. And who was sitting right behind him? Elon Musk, the richest person in the world, and other billionaires in the Trump cabinet, including one who just said not that long ago that Americans on Social Security wouldn't miss one of their Social Security checks. Only the fraudsters would notice that. Say that to the 73 million people who get Social Security. But that's the attitude of the billionaires in this Trump cabinet, the people he's really looking out for. And so when he says a golden age for America, that's who he means. He means Elon Musk and the billionaires, Elon Musk who's rigging the government for the billionaires, and all the others in the cabinet who don't think Americans would miss a Social Security payment that they earned. So my question to you, and I want to, again, thank the senator from New Jersey. I know it's been a long day's journey into the night. But it's important that we address these issues in the courts, and the courts are upholding the rule of law, that we address these issues and fight them in Congress, and that we do so in communities across the country, and people need to understand what's happening. So the core issue here, is it not, my friend, that Donald Trump really is betraying the people he said he was going to fight for. And at the end of the day, and we're going to see that later this week in the Senate, the goal is to provide these big tax breaks to wealthy people at the expense of everybody else in America. That is the big betrayal. So if you could just zero in once again on the central narrative that we're seeing play out during the Trump administration.
Well, you're putting it right. Donald Trump made commitments to America. We have quotes of him at rally after rally. I'm going to bring your, he used to say, oh, grocery, that's a really great word, I think he said. I'm going to bring down grocery prices. Well, grocery prices are up dramatically. The American dream, and many of us see that as owning a home. Well, you said it. Home prices are already up, but with these tariffs, they could go upwards of 10% more. You can be sure that Canadian lumber coming down here is going to be expensive. You can see Donald Trump making it more difficult to access health care, and this massive reconciliation is going to be a direct attack on working class health care, on health care of expectant mothers, on health care of Americans with disabilities, on health care of the majority of seniors in nursing homes. I'm about to go, my next chapter is all going to be about how Trump is rolling back common sense protections for clean air and water. And Elizabeth Warren said it very powerfully. He's reducing services, which is a service cut to people with Social Security. In so many ways, Americans should see these crises looming, these attacks, but ask yourself one economic question. With the stock market, who just had its worst quarter in years, and people's retirement savings, if they have it in 401ks, is going down. Ask yourself this question. I ask America to please ask yourself this financial question. Am I better off than I was 71 days ago? Am I better off or worse off? And this is before he's even gotten going, because we see what's about to happen. With this whole sham reconciliation process, they're already trying to change the rules to obscure what they're doing. This is what they're doing. 3 things you should take home. Are we going to let them again, like they did with the ACA, with the Affordable Care Act, come after health care for 70+ million Americans by doing their proposed $880 billion cuts? Or are we going to allow them to blow a hole so big in the trillions of dollars, they're going to push it out for over 10 years, are they going to create such a deficit in our country that our children's children, they're stealing from our children's children and putting on a deficit that they're going to have to pay for. And number three, are they going to let them do all of that to renew tax cuts that the Congressional Budget Office at every independent agency says very clearly would add trillions, would give trillions of dollars of tax cuts that go disproportionately to the wealthiest in our nation? That's the addition. That's what we know. And it doesn't account for the things that he's doing to our allies. It doesn't account for how he's turning his back on NATO. It doesn't account for how he's praising Putin and calling Zelensky a dictator. It doesn't account for how he's giving advantage to China around the world, from the region in Southeast Asia all the way to Africa. It doesn't account for how he's already made it harder to enroll for the Affordable Care Act. It doesn't account for all the other things he's doing that we wake up and hear every day, not to mention trying to threaten Greenland, trying to threaten Panama, trying to change the name of the Gulf of Mexico. All these things he didn't tell us he was going to do, didn't promise. He promised to lower your grocery prices, they're higher. He promised, I'll be a better steward of the economy. It's worse than we inherited. Over and over, he's breaking promises and doing outrageous things like disappearing people off of American streets, violating fundamental principles of this document, invoking the Alien Enemies Act from the 1700s that was last used to put Japanese Americans in internment camps? Do we see what's happening? How much is enough? That we have to stand and do something different, not just in this body, in America, because you know this. How we stopped him in his last term was the American people rose up, spoke up, stood up, rose up in the most extraordinary nonviolent demonstrations and demands. So thank you.
Yield for another question.
Yes, I will yield for a question while retaining the floor.
And I see that my friend and colleague, Senator Alsterbrooks from the great state of Maryland, is on the floor. So I'm going to be very brief with this question. And I want to thank you for reminding us, of course, of the other great betrayal that's been going on over the last 70-plus days. There's the betrayal against the American people and working people here at home, but then there's the betrayal of our allies, like the Ukrainians, who Donald Trump is throwing under the bus as we speak, and other close partners and allies around the world. And I have to depart here for a moment because we have a hearing in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and I'm privileged to serve on that committee with the gentleman from New Jersey. And one of the people before the committee is their nominee to be our ambassador to Turkey. Now, of course, Erdogan just locked up his major opponent, the popular mayor of Istanbul. We've not heard a peep from the Trump administration about the question of how this undermines democracy. But I want to close on the point that you just raised. It's kind of hard for Donald Trump to complain about Erdogan disappearing people when right here in the United States of America, you had a Turkish student at Tufts disappeared by people who showed up without any identification, some with hoods on, and sent her apparently to Louisiana because she spoke out on an important issue of national concern. And the First Amendment is pretty clear. You can engage in controversial speech that someone may like or dislike, but you're protected, and that includes everybody here in America, because that's an important value to us. Apparently, it's not an important value to Donald Trump, who, like Erdogan, essentially wants to whisk away anybody who disagrees with him. I thank, again, the senator from New Jersey and just ask him to elaborate on that. But I also see my friend and colleague, the senator from Maryland.
Answer to your question, then, which is the irony that this president is remaining quiet about folks that are violating international law in many ways. So I think it's absurd, and you're right, it's another betrayal.
Will the senator yield for a question?
I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
First, I'd like to commend my colleague. I want to thank you, first of all, for your spiritual obedience. I want to thank you so much as well for your commitment and your dedication. And want to thank you as well for your courageous leadership. I want to thank you also, Senator Booker, for your recognition of the times that we are living in. These are times that we will recount, our children will recount, and I think all of those of good conscience who watch during this time and say nothing will also be held to account. As the senator has eloquently remarked, these are not normal times. We're watching an administration that is drunk with vengeance, hatred, and surrounded by incompetent people who are taking callous actions, who are inhumane, and because of their incompetence are making costly mistakes that will harm the American people and denigrate the hardworking people of this country by proposing tax cuts. And these tax cuts are not designed to help the average American person. They are designed to help billionaires. And they're doing so by firing thousands of middle-class workers and more. What we are seeing before our eyes is not only unconscionable, we know as well that it is deeply immoral, that it is inhumane, it is wicked. We are seeing with glee the actions of people who are so happy to tear down, but I am watching and waiting to see what it is they intend to build in this country. And in your remarks over these hours, you have made that plain for the American people to see. You've uplifted the stories of everyday people. And what we recognize as we hear about the firings and we hear about the devastation and chaos is we're not talking about numbers. We're talking about humans, about people. These are our friends. These are our family members. These are our neighbors. These are our church friends. These are our colleagues who this administration has harmed. And so my question today centers around the topic of housing. We have a housing crisis in this country. That's no secret. And in fact, we recognize that through the actions of this administration, what is harmful will be exacerbated. Maryland is nearly 100,000 housing units short. And as you know, it is both about an affordability and a supply problem. We need to make home ownership, which is part of the American dream, and how the average American builds wealth in this country, accessible to more Americans. I think about my parents, Mr. Senator, who married at 21 and 22 years old. And at the time that they married, although my father was a car salesman and selling newspapers and my mother was a receptionist, 5 years into their marriage, they could afford to buy a home. This is no longer the expectation of the average American family. My own 19-year-old daughter doesn't have the realistic hope that she can follow even her grandparents. This problem affects red states and it affects blue states, which is the theme that you have hit on in all of these hours of speaking. When this president acts against the interest of the middle class, we recognize that he is not just harming Democrats as he intends, but unfortunately, his actions harm everyday Americans. It affects those who voted for him, it affects those who didn't vote for him, and it affects those who did not vote at all. He's harming Republicans too. He's harming Americans. And so this administration is slashing funding and personnel at the very agencies that are tasked with addressing this crisis. He is illegally firing HUD employees. And this administration has stalled millions of dollars in previously allocated funding intended to help those who need affordable housing. And again, his actions are so indiscriminate, so immoral, so callous, so heartless, that he is impacting the very people who supported him, as well as those who didn't. This administration has effectively ended enforcement of the Fair Housing Act, one of the most important American civil rights laws. This administration is considering privatizing the Federal Housing Finance Agency, which guarantees over half of the U.S. mortgage market. And to make matters worse, this administration is proposing sweeping tariffs on our allies, driving up the cost of home construction. And let's be clear, absolutely none of this will help to build homes. None of this will make home ownership more accessible to Marylanders or Americans. And in fact, we understand that it is not the intention of this administration to do so. It's for the billionaires to be able to afford their tax cuts. And so I've heard from people all across my state, blue areas, red areas, purple areas, every area, who are concerned about this. And so I have a question for you, and I want to thank you as I ask the question for sacrificing your own body today to bring attention to this. What are you seeing in the state of New Jersey about how this administration's unconscionable actions are making housing less affordable and home ownership less accessible?
The Senator, I want to thank her for the question. I want to thank her for being my colleague, but more important than even being my friend, she is a spiritual sister of mine and was very kind to me when I was telling her that I was going to do this, and gave me so much encouragement and prayer, and I just love you and I'm grateful. And you read the litany of things. I had a whole section, a whole binder that my staff told me to skip and go to this one about all the things, going in deep and depth to all the things the Trump administration is doing to make housing more unaffordable, more inaccessible, more expensive, more discrimination in housing, which we know is still a problem, more challenges, more pain heaped upon rural areas, and more complications and problems for building affordable housing in all areas. It is so frustrating to me that this is a problem. We cannot lay the crisis of housing at one administration in the United States. We need to have bold visions and ideas to address this. I am so excited about this next generation of Americans that are rising up with bold visions. I want to give a shout out to Ezra Klein. His book is a must-read abundance. This is a vision of doing great things again, of building housing, of redeeming the American dream. But to have a president that is dead set on for the next 4 years to do the kind of things that you made a litany of, and now tomorrow is going to bring tariffs that are going to raise the price even more of housing, is outrageous. Where are his promises to make this country more affordable and more accessible? And you heard the data that I read about we have so many millions of Americans. Close to the majority of renters now spend more than a third of their income on rent, which is a very definition our government has of housing insecurity. So it should anger people in this country. Even if you own your home, have paid off your mortgage, you should be angry about what they're doing to the American dream, and that there's no bold ideas coming from this administration to help. In fact, they're hurting. They're hurting. So thank you very much to my colleague. Thank you for giving me strength as you did in prayer. And I just thank you for the question that should anger people, that should inspire people, that should activate people, that should engage people, that should demand from us that we take our country away from those who want to do so much harm. I want to start by reading until someone, I know the prayer. I'm going to keep going. I want to talk about environmental protections and how this country is becoming less safe for people with emphysema or with asthma, because Donald Trump is rolling back common sense environmental protections, threatening our children's future and hurting our nation's economy. Energy costs in America are continuing to rise, making it harder and harder for working families to pay their bills. And at a time that we should be investing in clean energy, this administration is canceling projects that would create more jobs for Americans and lower energy prices. He claims he supports an all-of-the-above strategy, but that's clearly not what we're seeing, and there's too much silence about it. All Americans, regardless of where you're born, we deserve safe drinking water, clean air, and an equal opportunity for a healthy and fulfilling life. President Trump promised America the cleanest air and the cleanest water, but on entering office, he immediately instructed the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, to cut a long list of common sense environmental protections. This administration is rolling back efforts to reduce emissions from power plants. He's letting polluters pollute our air more. That affects the health of Americans. It drives up aggravating the rates of asthma and emphysema. weakening rules that keep our rivers and our water systems clean as well.
Pursuant to the order of February 29, 1960, the hour of 12 noon having arrived, the Senate having been in continuous session since yesterday, the Senate will suspend for a prayer by the Senate chaplain.
Let us pray. Lord of hosts, you have done great things for us, filling our hearts with determination to do your will. You protect us from unseen dangers, supply us with wisdom, and direct our steps. Today, we are grateful for the efforts of the floor staff, the Capitol Police, the stenographers, the pages, and all those who have worked through the night. We pray you give them the strength they need for this day. Today, give our senators the assurance of your presence. Inspire them with a calm faith, a steady peace, and a firm resolve to do your will. Let no weapon formed against them prosper. We pray in your omnipotent name. Amen.
I'm going to continue.
The senator from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you. I'm going to continue until one of my colleagues asks me a question.
Senator, yield for a question.
One of my heroes in the Senate, a living legend, my partner on some bills that I'm so passionate about expanding IVF, someone that is just freaking awesome. I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Thank you, Senator Booker, for taking this important stand and for doing so much to make it clear how much pain Donald Trump and Elon Musk are inflicting on the American people in every sector of our society. I'm going to be asking you a question about what you've heard from agricultural businesses in your state about the damage that this administration is doing and the jobs that either have been or will be lost as a result. But I thought I would give you some background on what I'm hearing as well. I want to focus this body's attention on our nation's farmers and ranchers who seem to be getting punched day after day, week after week by the Trump-Musk oligarchy. Whether it's their harmful tariffs that hurt our soy and corn farmers, canceling and freezing more than $1 billion in funding for schools and food banks to purchase food from local farmers, or halting reimbursement and contract payments that our farmers are already owed, the senator from New Jersey and I are both working together to undo some of the most harmful impacts of these disastrous decisions, including joining forces to push his Honor Farmer Contracts Act forward. We're also starting to hear reports from farmers about just how damaging the Musk-Trump dismantling of USAID is. Jobs and businesses right here in America. For example, I don't know if the senator has heard, but in North Carolina, they had $2.2 billion in USAID awards, including for 27 large-scale farmers who were fulfilling orders for humanitarian food assistance, and 4 universities who were receiving agricultural research funding. More than 300 North Carolina workers have lost their jobs as a result of this freeze. In Georgia, they had over $389 million in USAID awards, including 9 large-scale farmers fulfilling orders for humanitarian food assistance and 6 universities receiving agricultural research funding. Arkansas had over $210 million in USAID awards, including purchases of rice, grain, and beans from our farmers. Florida has lost $91 million in USAID awards, including $38 million to the University of Florida to improve livestock productivity and food security in developing countries. Texas lost over $48 million in USAID awards, including 9 large-scale farmers fulfilling orders for humanitarian food assistance and 8 universities receiving agricultural research funding. The list goes on and on. My neighbors in Iowa over time now have lost over $4 million in USDA food commodity sales. They have gained they had a total of over $149 million in purchases through USDA and other programs for USAID. Illinois has lost $245 million in aid in farm income that would go towards USAID and aid programs. I think that our farmers have been hit with body blow after body blow from this administration, an administration that in their first term and even in the second term promised that they would look out for America. But I have to say to my friend from New Jersey, I don't think that this administration has lived up to their promises to farmers. Remember that a nation that cannot feed itself, if we lose those family farms, if we lose our ag sector, we cannot lead the free world, we cannot feed ourselves. And frankly, farmers have been hit over and over again. These incoming tariffs are going to be disastrous for our farmers. I was just in South Central and Southern Illinois, just across the Mississippi River from Missouri, talking to our farmers in St. Clair County, Illinois. And you know what they tell me? They tell me that the tariffs are going to affect their products being sold overseas. Our top products in Illinois: corn, soybean, pork. We're also the largest grower of pumpkins, so if you get that Libby can of pumpkins at Halloween time and Christmas time and Thanksgiving, that's thanks to Illinois. If you ever want to come, I'll take you out to the pumpkin fields. So it's the best pumpkins in the country. But frankly, they are being hurt over and over and over again. And so they're going to see the prices on their commodities affected. They can't sell their products overseas to the top countries that purchase their products. At the same time, their inputs, the fertilizer, the equipment that they need will be more expensive. The tariffs against Canada in terms of steel and aluminum is affecting John Deere. John Deere, hundreds of years old, an American company founded in the heartland of this great nation, is laying off people. And so we have to do better by our farmers. And our farmers have been betrayed time and time again by this Trump administration. They promise big things, but then they come in and by cutting programs like USAID, they are hurting our farmers, their bottom line. I sat down and I met with farmers who were 7th generation, 8th generation watching the teenage son of the farmer, and they're afraid that they're not going to have a farm there anymore. Their products, their margins are so tiny that they don't think they're going to make it. So my question to my colleague from New Jersey is, what are you hearing from farmers, and why do you think this administration is taking so many actions that hurt them and hurt American jobs?
I love my colleague. I love my colleague. I love how she's been standing up quite figuratively time and time again on issues. She's really inspired me. I've told folks that on social media I have been celebrating, elevating, liking her content.
Thank you.
She is truly fierce and is a voice that gives me strength. And today she's asking me about one of my favorite subjects. A lot of people were surprised. My staff knows this story well, that I'm on the Ag Committee. And when one of my staffers, a guy sitting over here, Adam Zipkin, who's been with me since 1998, came to me and said, you should go on the Farm Committee, this is going to get me in trouble, I laughed at him. I had committees I loved. And what's that old saying? At first, they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then they finally accept it. He told me all the issues I care about intersect with our farm and food system, that our farmers are such vital parts of America. They need more people standing up and fighting for them, because the American farmers are getting screwed. We're losing thousands of farms in this country. Family farmers are going belly up. The math doesn't work for them. And this president, as you've pointed out, oh gosh, President Trump is causing an unprecedented amount of chaos, instability, and harm for farmers. Farmers already deal with so much uncertainty from prices, weather, pests, and more. They should not have to deal with uncertainty that our government won't follow through, as you said, on contracts. On contracts. I've had farmers from New Jersey to Texas coming to my office about this president freezing contracts that we approved in a bipartisan manner, putting them in financial crisis. One of the first things that Trump and Musk did is freeze thousands of contracts and agreements that have been already made with our farmers. Farmers applied to grant programs and were selected on their merits. They made legally binding contracts, yet starting in late January, farmers found themselves not getting reimbursed, sometimes reading in the news that a particular grant was frozen, or sometimes no information at all, other than that they were not getting their payments processed. I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Thank you. I think the issue of contracts is especially important because so much of these cuts are claimed to be to cut waste in government spending. You know, we have a law in the books that says that if we don't make payments according to existing contracts, then we have to pay the interest on that, on those payments that we are late in providing. And so if we, for example, cut $2 billion in or freeze funding payment on $2 billion in contracts as we did with USAID, that means that we're going to have to pay, say, 2% interest rate, $60 million in interest. I don't see where that is a savings for taxpayers. That is a waste of taxpayer dollars. I think that that is something that we should be talking about. And I also think that, as you were mentioning, the issue with our farmers, they are important to our national security. The SNAP program is a good example of it. That program was instituted after World War II. We had the very famous example of Audie Murphy, who was the most highly decorated soldier coming out of World War II. He could not pass the initial test to enlist in the Navy, into the Army during World War II because he didn't weigh enough due to malnutrition post the Great Depression. And so we created the SNAP program to make sure that America's young people were fed, were no longer malnourished, so that they could get food in our schools while they were going to school. Because it was good for the United States military to have a workforce that could enlist in the military and meet the standards. That is the origin of the SNAP program, and that has been a program that has sustained our farmers over time. And I think that we are losing sight of that. And so my question to the senator from New Jersey is to hear a little bit more. Have you heard about the SNAP program and also the work that the farmers in New Jersey have been doing in terms of organic and sustainable farming, which is really where the beginning of the organic and sustainable farming movement has begun in this country?
Yeah, I'm aware of another one of my colleagues. I just want to say, yes, I'm aware of that. The way that Trump, I'm just going to summarize, contract freezes, this is one of the ways Trump and Musk are causing havoc. Program cuts. They've eliminated programs, as you said, that support local food systems, including those that connect farmers with food banks and schools and promote regenerative practices. It's stunning. The USDA destabilization, Trump and Musk have laid off USDA employees, closed USDA offices, hindering the agency's ability to provide essential services to farmers. Tariff policies. Trump's tariff policies implemented without consultation with or support from farmers will increase farmer costs and consumer food prices. And finally, general chaos, which seems to be something, as you're pointing out, that they're very good at. Farmers already deal with so much uncertainty from prices, weather, pests, and more. They should not have to deal with uncertainty from Donald Trump's administration that will undermine everything that they do.
The question for the senator from New Jersey.
I will yield for a question while retaining the floor.
I would like to ask the senator from New Jersey a question pertaining to the Farm Bill. You speak to uncertainty. One of the things that I've heard from my agricultural sector and my farmers, Farm Bureau in Illinois, is the desperate need for this body to pass a Farm Bill, especially when it comes to crop insurance, the crop insurance program, as well as, again, retaining SNAP benefits. I do think that crop insurance is something that our farmers care deeply about. It is a tool that they use to make sure that they are able to survive when there are bad crop years, whether that is through disease, whether that is through drought or floods. Our farmers certainly, this is a program for them to sustain themselves and be able to look out for themselves. So it is a personal responsibility on the part of farmers. It is especially important for young farmers who are just starting out. Those margins are so tiny. And when you take away the commodity program and the USAID, when you take away SNAP program, and then you don't provide them with crop insurance, you're going to lose those family farms. And what's going to happen? Large agribusinesses are going to take over, and they don't have the well-being of the American people at their heart. And so, I would love to hear from the senator from New Jersey would you agree that what we should be doing right now is not attacking farmers and cutting commodity programs and cutting and freezing funding for USAID that it provides a market for farm products, but instead we should be working on passing a farm bill?
Yeah, I love you. I love you. I love you for bringing these things to point. Because by the way, with Adam Zipkin, we did a farm tour, and we were in Southern Illinois meeting with Republican farmers. This is now before the pandemic. And you see that we have so much common cause as they're trying desperately to hold on to their farms. And so the crop insurance program, we need to reimagine it so it's more accessible to independent family farmers, not just big agribusinesses. We need to be visionary about our farm bill to create a food system that the farmers want, that help them be better stewards of the land. The oversubscribed programs for regenerative farming and cover crops and environmental practices, they want those things to preserve their soil, reduce their dependence on chemicals. They want those things. They want a farm bill that works for them, and we should be delivering that in a bipartisan way. So you are right on point. But do you hear that from the White House? Not at all. Not at all.
Would the senator yield for a question?
I will yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Well, Senator Booker, I have a question for you about Medicaid and Medicaid expansion, but I want to start with a little bit of background.
Please.
As you may recall, when I was governor of New Hampshire, thanks to the Affordable Care Act, the program Medicaid expansion became an option for my state. And I worked with people of both political parties to make sure that the people of New Hampshire could actually get the benefit of Medicaid expansion. Expanded Medicaid meant that for the first time, working adults who couldn't earn enough money to actually buy insurance themselves, but who were working and single, could actually get health care coverage. Medicaid expansion meant that people with mental illness who wouldn't be covered by traditional Medicaid actually could get health care and could get coverage. People with substance use disorder, with addiction, could finally get Medicaid coverage and get better. And we worked across party lines, took a few tries, but we got Medicaid expansion done in New Hampshire. And today, Medicaid covers more than 180,000 people in my state, including more than 90,000 children, more than 15,000 people with disabilities, and nearly 10,000 seniors. And here's another number that people don't always think about. It covers 10,000 people who are getting addiction treatment. My state, as you know, has been very, very hard hit by the fentanyl crisis. And just in when the president gave his joint address in March, I brought a woman from New Hampshire with me who had been suffering from addiction. Medicaid expansion covered her treatment. She got into recovery. She's now working in the private sector, but also offering counseling and peer recovery services to people who are trying to get their addiction treated through Medicaid expansion. And she is now on private insurance. I remember talking to another Granite Stater while we were working to pass Medicaid expansion. So she had been laid off from her job as part of the Great Recession, right? She had an ongoing chronic stomach condition. So as she got laid off, her health insurance went away too, and she couldn't afford the COBRA fee to keep her health insurance. So she couldn't get health care. So she got sicker and sicker, so she couldn't go to work. But because she was a single adult, she couldn't get Medicaid coverage. So here's somebody who has been working, wants to work, has a chronic illness, can't get to work. We passed Medicaid expansion. She got coverage, she got treatment, and she got back to work. The other great benefit of Medicaid expansion covering people with addiction in New Hampshire has been that as people have gotten better, as more and more physicians have learned to integrate addiction care into primary care, we have a lot more people in recovery. And like many of our states, we also have a workforce shortage. What's been happening now? New Hampshire is a leader in recovery-friendly workplaces so that people who got this Medicaid expansion coverage, got their addiction treated, got better, can go to work in the private sector and get private insurance. That's some of the benefit of Medicaid expansion. But of course, what we are hearing about now from the House and Senate Republicans is their desire to make massive cuts to Medicaid, including Medicaid expansion. And they're doing it. They want to rip away health care from millions of Americans so that they can pay for big tax breaks for billionaires and corporate special interests. So the Republicans have proposed cutting up to 1/3 of federal funding for Medicaid. If those cuts go into effect, that could mean 30,000 children in my state will lose their health care coverage. That means 1 in 5 seniors in New Hampshire could lose their nursing home care. And all told, that could mean 60,000 people cut off from Medicaid, including, for instance, a young man whose parents I just met at the airport, actually, who has autism, and Medicaid pays for his health care, right? But he could be cut off too. So if Republicans continue with this plan, I am really, really concerned about what is going to happen to millions of Americans who currently get their health care through Medicaid. So Senator Booker, can you address the ways in which Medicaid helps provide health care for Americans and the disastrous impact it would have if Republicans proceed with their plan to take coverage away from up to 25 million Americans just so that they can pay for big tax breaks, by the way, for people who are already billionaires?
So before I answer the senator's question, I just want anybody who's watching to know that, I'll put it bluntly, this is one of the baddest ass human beings serving here in the Senate. You have been a governor of a state with all the challenges. You are beloved. I've spent a lot of time in New Hampshire, folks. It's after New Jersey. It's one of my favorite new states. No disrespect to New Mexico over here on my right. But I love your state. I love the people of your state, and they love you. You are an extraordinary governor. You are a trailblazer, a glass ceiling breaker, a name taker. You are a badass. And to have served with you as my colleague, you have the kind of leadership in the Senate that is needed more of, somebody that stands in the middle and draws people together to common sense and pragmatism. I started on health care, some 16 so hours ago. And I read, you would be proud of me, because she's one of these voices that comes to me and says, hey, Cory, let's bring people together. I know that the presiding officer, who's new here, but he has the same spirit of trying to bring people together. And this might be the third time I've seen him in the chair over the last hours, 17 hours. Thank you, sir. But you whisper in my ear all the time, we've got to find a way to do this together. We've got to find a way to put more indivisible into this one nation under God. And so I hope that you would be proud, because I told my staff, who prepared with days preparing all these sections, from farming to environment, all the ways that Donald Trump is betraying his promises, betraying America, driving up costs, wrecking our economy, endangering us globally and here at home, and turning us back on a lot of our values, all while disrespecting this document more than any president I've seen. But I wanted to make sure, I told the instructions to my staff, pull from all the Republicans you can. We want to use the Wall Street Journal. We want to use the Cato Institute. We want to bring this together, because what we're standing up here is not to talk about left or right. We're talking about what is right or wrong. I do not want to talk about this being a Democratic moment. It is a moral moment. And you are the perfect senator to be asking these questions about health care to me, because of what you stand for. You, when you got elected as governor twice, I think, when you got elected to the Senate here, you had to get votes from Democrats, independents, or Republicans, or you can't win in New Hampshire. I've been in your state. I've met the people. And God, you have a very participatory democracy up there. People feel like if you're not going north to south house parties, you have to engage directly with the people. They don't care what party you ascribe to. They want to feel you, see you. They don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. That's why I think you're such a badass leader. And so you would have been proud of me when I did the healthcare section, because I read from Republican governors and Democratic governors. 40 states expanded Medicaid, and all of these governors, all of these voices said exactly what you're intimating here is, do not let Donald Trump cut $880 billion out of Medicaid. It will crush rural hospitals. Yep. It'll crush level 1 trauma care centers. It'll crush organizations that deal with beautiful disabled children. It'll crush people who are struggling for health care. It'll crush nursing homes. It'll hurt red counties and blue counties. It will hurt America. Republican voices were saying that. And to have a bipartisan senator who embodies the spirit this place should ascribe to more to say these things is affirming the truth. Why? Why are they rushing to cut $880 billion, which voice after voice that I read said it would do so much damage to people's lives, so much damage to healthcare providers, so much damage to hospitals? Why? The only two things that will result from that is that they'll extend the Trump tax cuts, where the disproportionate benefits went to the wealthiest among us who are doing better than they've ever done in this country. They don't need it. Taking money from struggling folks and giving it to them is not the answer. And then the other thing, to a person who, like me, when we were executives, you were a governor, I was a mighty mayor, we had to balance our budgets. But they're not balancing the budget. They're not lowering the deficit. They're increasing it by trillions of dollars. This makes no sense to a pragmatic person who has balanced budgets, who expanded health care access, who made her state work, who has love and respect and votes, frankly, from Democrats and Republicans. You know this makes no sense. And so if you're standing up, and colleagues of mine further to the left of me, then why aren't other people why did only one Republican in the House vote against it? He told the truth. Massey. I see some of my Republican colleagues here. He's a fiscal hawk. He told the truth. This budget is going to explode the American national debt, stealing from future generations. I can't vote for this. He was not bullied like other people in the House into doing what dear leader Donald Trump says. And so, my colleague, you are on the money. I have internalized your voice. There's only a few people's voices I've internalized. One of them is my mother, but you're more my peer. You are one of those voices in America right now that we need, that does not slip into a partisan argument, but makes the pragmatic argument that what Donald Trump is trying to do with the aiding and abetting of congressional Republicans is wrong. It is fiscally wrong. It is morally wrong. It will hurt Americans. It is not for the common welfare. It's not for the common defense. Read the start of the Constitution, please. I beg of you. We all swore to uphold it. How do our founders begin? We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the best blessings of liberty to ourselves and our prosperity. Trillions of dollars of deficit doesn't secure the blessing of liberties, it endangers our country. The common welfare is this idea that everybody should have access to what makes us free. What makes us free is not having medical debt. What makes us free is not being chained to uncertainty and security that if someone in my family gets sick, I will not be afforded. Still, the majority, or close to the majority, of bankruptcies in the United States of America are people who can't afford their health care bills. We need to find better ways to expand access and not cut more people off. You know this, former governor. There are a number of states that have these things called triggers, automatic triggers, that if the funding for Medicaid reduces to covering 90% of the costs, what happens in those states? Boom. Medicare expansion goes offline. So if you don't even cut it $880 billion, maybe you say, we'll just do $250 billion of an axe. States are going to lose their expansion. People are going to suffer and get hurt. Why? You said it, you said it, and you said it. You and I are the two people that want to see entrepreneurs make money. You and I want to see small business people thrive. We don't hate rich people. We think that's great. It's often, not always, Donald Trump, it's often a sign of people in America using their ingenuity, applying it, and being successful. But you and I both know that the richest people in this country don't need more tax cuts. It is morally wrong. It is fiscally wrong. It is a wrong in the name of God and America. How could we be doing this to ourselves?
Will the senator yield for another question?
I can't call you one of the baddest ass people I've ever worked with and not yield to your questions, but I have to read the words. I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Well, thank you for yielding the question for a question while retaining the floor, and thank you for the very nice compliments. I do have a question for you about Social Security, and then I think another colleague of mine has additional questions. But look, as you know, you just talked about my wonderful state, New Hampshire. You also just talked about your mother, and I should just also let you know that my mother always made me memorize the preamble to the United States Constitution. So as I listened to you read it, I
Shots
thought,
fired
Mom,
on the Senate floor. Where's the parliamentarian?
I hope my mom is watching.
Rule
right
19
now.
her.
But here's my question, and just by way of background. As you know, New Hampshire's a small state. It's a very rural state. And recently, the Trump-Musk forces have announced that they want to close a Social Security office in Littleton, New Hampshire. Now, Littleton, New Hampshire, that Social Security office, which takes applications and provides technical assistance for people who need Social Security or need Medicare or who have questions about their current coverage, right? It is the northernmost office in New Hampshire. So they closed that office, and now my folks in the North Country, and there are about 334,000 people in New Hampshire with Social Security, right? My people in the North Country will have to drive as far as 100 miles to go to another New Hampshire Social Security office. And meanwhile, of course, they're laying off people from Social Security offices, and they're making it harder to get assistance via the telephone, which, as you know, many people who are on Social Security find the telephone the easiest way to make a connection, get technical assistance. So Elon Musk has called Social Security a Ponzi scheme. He says he wants to cut $700 billion from Social Security and Medicare. So my question to you, as we're looking at a administration that says that it wants to make things more efficient, but is actually laying people off, closing offices, making it harder for people to actually connect with the Social Security office. My concerns, of course, are that this is just going to delay claims, delay coverage, make it harder for people to get on Social Security because actually Trump and Musk want to cut Social Security. Trump said, of course, that he was going to protect it when he was running for office. But now he's letting Musk do his cuts. So Senator Booker, can you speak to the ways in which seniors across the country count on Social Security benefits that they have paid into? Right? This is not charity. People pay into the Social Security system. They earn the benefit. And can you talk about the disastrous impacts if this administration takes benefits, Social Security, Medicare away from our seniors?
Earlier, or last night, I had a whole chapter on Social Security outlining not just what you said, my colleague, my friend, but stories from seniors. And some of them really got to me. They were hard to read through. I have to say, I had prepped this by reading a lot of them, but somehow on the floor, when I read about the woman who had Parkinson's, when I read about the person taking care of their elderly parents, a spouse with dementia, children with special needs, and Social Security, it helps a lot of folks, but here's the craziness of the Trump attacks on the Social Security Administration. First, he makes people insecure about it. My mom lives in this amazing senior home, Las Ventanas, in Las Vegas, Nevada. Most of the people there, first of all, I love them all for who they are, not their party affiliation, but it's more Republicans than Democrats. And the stories my mom tells me about just the worry that they or other people in their family have because of Elon Musk calling it a Ponzi scheme, of Donald Trump talking about utter lies from the highest post in the land during a joint address, savaging Social Security with lies that everybody from conservative papers to Democratic papers to left-leaning papers have all called that lie, 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 lie. There are not millions of people receiving false payments. They've insinuated so much insecurity that people were writing me letters talking about they're losing sleep. They have so much anxiety because they only live on their Social Security check. And Brother Howard Luckman, who I know, and I don't know what he was thinking when he said it, a billionaire talking about his mother-in-law. I don't know what you were thinking, Howard. I just don't understand it, how you were saying if she misses a payment, she's okay, but if people complain, they're probably fraudsters. Do you understand how many millions of Americans only have that as their only protection between poverty and destitution? That if they miss a payment, they can't make their rent, they can't buy food? And so they've created so much insecurity, so much fear, and I compared it, Governor, I compared it to the difference between an FDR and a Donald Trump. FDR knew people were suffering, they knew people were afraid, and he stood before the American public and didn't lie to them, didn't attack people, didn't demean people, didn't degrade people. He comforted people. He allayed their fears. He inspired them. You have nothing to fear but fear itself. What an opposite in leadership. And so, yeah, there are a lot of people who right now don't know, but then my colleague from Massachusetts comes in and makes the very clear point, the professor we have in our caucus, she makes a clear point. They've already done benefit cuts because when you close offices in rural areas, that person who is missing a check or has an issue, now they have to drive, how many miles? 100 miles. Now, what is that hardship to a senior? I got heard from people in their 90s. They already are having benefit cuts. The Wall Street Journal, I told you, I was trying to make you proud. I wanted to get as many sources from anybody that was more centered or right. And I read from the Wall Street Journal and said the customer service in Social Security is going from bad to worse. That was the title of the article. So they're already doing cuts. They're already launching, heaping insecurity on our seniors, heaping inconvenience on our seniors, heaping fear upon our seniors, heaping insecurity, making people lose sleep. This is wrong, 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 wrong. This is not a model of leadership. It's a model of cruelty and mean-spiritedness and hurting people. When is it enough, America? When is it enough that we say it may not be my grandmother that depends on that Social Security check, but I love America, and you cannot love Americans. You cannot love America. You cannot call yourself a patriot. Please listen to me. You cannot say you love this country and you're a patriot, because patriotism is love of country, but you can't love your country unless you love your countrymen and women. And love means that if somebody, some mother or grandmother is hurting, is afraid, that I'm going to stand up and do what I can to comfort them and fight for them. Because today it might be your grandmother, it might be your family with a disabled child. This is not right or left, it is right or wrong. This is not a partisan moment, it is a moral moment. Where do you stand? We started this by talking about John Lewis. It is time for good trouble, necessary trouble. Thank you, my friend. Even though you made fun of me for, in my tired state, not remembering the very important preamble to the Constitution.
Very well.
Thank you very much. That actually means I take your compliments because you don't give them abundantly or overly well, so thank you very much.
Senator yield for a question.
Heck no, not to you, not to you, not to you. Let me tell you, I have something to get off my chest about you. I woke up I woke up yesterday morning, and the first thing I did, now this shirt's all wrinkled and a little ripe, but the first thing I did is grab a gift from you. People don't get upset, ethics-wise. We're allowed to give each other's gifts. This was like, I don't know how much it cost, but you gave me, I was talking to you about traveling and how we have to pack bags and go all the time. And he said, you told me I travel with a steamer. And I pulled out this little steamer for this shirt that I'm wearing right now. You were one of the kindest, sweetest people I know. You're one of my closest friends here in the United States Senate. And I want to say something about you, because in this moment, if people are watching, I want people to go there. We had a conversation. You came to my office. It's always a sign of respect when you come to the senator's office. And you came to my office and we were talking about social media, and I was encouraging you, you were a little resistant, if you don't mind me outing you, to open up and get more on the platform. We were talking about ideas. And talking about Social Security, talking about Medicare, Medicaid, you opened up to me, and I hope I'm not betraying confidences. And I asked you just like, what do you do? Like, you were such an amazing human being. You're one of the kindest people I know. I asked you, what do you do on your weekends? What do you do for fun? Let people see it. And then you kind of made me pause when you said, well, my mother's getting kind of old. It's getting older. I love her so much. And you said that my brothers, my siblings and I, we alternate weekends just spending time with our mother. It was one of the sweetest things I heard. And then I said to you, what do you do with your mom? And then you brightened up and you choked me up, you jerk, because you said, what I love to do with my mom is to dance with her in the kitchen. When we're in the kitchen making food or something, I just love sometimes to put on a song and we dance. I don't know why it struck me as beautiful, and this is what I hope people will do right now. I said, well, why don't you record that? And I didn't think you would do it. You would ask her if you could do it, but you then put up one of the most beautiful videos I've ever seen from one of my colleagues of you and your mom in the kitchen. I think it's on your Instagram page. And I have looked at that video. I'm probably all the views right now of my colleague, this big United States senator, loving his mother so much. And we are talking about that. I've talked about this on the floor. Great nations respect their elders. They take care of them. One of my colleagues, when they asked me a question about Social Security, they reminded me of what it was. The greatest anti-poverty program in the history of America. That Social Security rescued millions of Americans from being in poverty. It virtually ended poverty, although the checks now are becoming meager and meager as prices are going up. More people are getting lower and lower towards poverty, and people who live on those checks live very austerely. But you're just this amazing guy that turns your own lived experience into greater and greater urgencies to fight for the people of New Mexico. So I did not want to yield for a question until getting that off my chest. You are my friend, you are my colleague, you are my brother, and more than you know it, you're my inspiration. So yes, I yield for a question while retaining the floor now. I feel like I have so much power here to yield to my colleagues who are often more eloquent. I'm like afraid of White House because he's one of the brainiest people in the Senate. But I'm now have the control. But for you, now that I've gotten this off my chest and hopefully embarrassed you, but maybe added a few more views to my favorite video, I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Well, Senator Booker, thank you. I won't be surprised if Mom's watching right now, so you're probably going to get some messages from her. But I want to thank my friend and colleague from the great state of New Jersey. You've been holding this space for the American people now for well over 17 hours. While we represent different parts of the country, Senator Booker, we have the same values. I learned from you the importance of treating people with respect and dignity. That's what we should all be talking about here today, every day. I've also learned a lot about grace from you. Now, I come to the floor to ask you a question about farmers. I think you and I both appreciate the long hours that farmers put in to take care of that soil, their families, the planning that goes into this, sowing seeds. Sometimes you have to do a little weeding to make sure that we're going to all benefit from the fruits of their labor. Now, having fresh food in a grocery store is not something that can be taken for granted. And for a lot of our constituents, I've had these conversations with nominees that have come before us when they ask me, well, why is someone just eating potato chips or Doritos from that local store? I'll educate them by saying that's the only store around.
Yes.
There's food deserts everywhere. But we could do something about that. We have programs in place that recognize the importance of getting someone a meal that needs that meal. Supporting our farmers out there to sow those seeds, to help them with their planting. But what I'm seeing right now, Senator Booker, is our farmers have been on the receiving end of these federal funds being taken away from the United States Department of Agriculture, these reckless tariffs that are hurting farmers and ranchers just as much as they're hurting anyone in America. Outbreaks, bird flu. People know what the cost of eggs are at the store now. And then they look into what's going on here, and there's this bird flu that's going around. And my constituents ask, why did the United States Department of Agriculture under Donald Trump fire the people, epidemiologists, that are responsible for containing this thing? It didn't make any sense to folks. I was in the Ag Committee earlier today, Senator Booker, and I was asking some questions to USDA. And I learned that on March 7th, 2025, under the Trump administration, the United States Department of Agriculture terminated the Local Food and Schools Program and the Local Food Purchase Assistance Cooperative Agreement. And then they went further, and they also notified grant applicants on March 24th that the fiscal year 2025 competition for the Patrick Leahy Farm to School Grant Program is canceled. Why does this matter to farmers and ranchers and people back home? These programs allow food banks and schools and others to purchase food from our local farmers. Now, our local farmers aren't just making a decision on what seed's going to be planted so they can sell the lettuce next week. They start this a year going back. So when the United States Department of Agriculture a year ago started talking to these farmers and ranchers about what programs were going to be in place, and then these farmers responsibly went and found customers to sell their food, food banks, different groups around the country, they planned the rest of the year to be able to get that nutritious food into the bellies of people that need it most. That sounds like respect and dignity.
Yep.
What's not respectful is when the Trump administration gives them a few days' notice and pulls the rug from under them and cancels the program that's going to allow the food bank, their customer, to buy their food. What do the farmers have to do now across America? Now, it gets worse and worse. I won't go into all of it, Senator Booker, but here's one of the dirty little secrets. All of these programs that are being taken away from the American people, it's to find an extra dollar for this tax policy under Donald Trump that my constituents started calling back in 2017 the Trump tax scam. Wow. Right? Well, why are you calling it that? And they said, well, everyone promised me, I'm making less than the median income, making less than $80,000, which is a lot of money in New Mexico. Across America, median income there is a little lower. I was told that we were going to get the brunt of this tax cut, recognizing that we're hardworking and how hard it is to make ends meet. But that's not what happened. Most of this went to families and folks making over $2.8 million. I don't have anything against those families. I wish them well. I want them to make more, $10 million next year. But they don't need a tax cut. That should be one of those hardworking families that were told that they were being prioritized, but they're the ones that told me anyway, that this was a Trump tax scam. That's the secret. That's where all this money's going. So, Senator Booker, whether I'm in a grocery store and I'm chatting with constituents, and we're out there looking at egg prices or whatever it may be, they're concerned about what's going on here, and all they're asking for me to share with my colleagues here is just tell them to tell us the truth.
Yes.
If they're going to vote to take these programs away, they have the votes by Republican colleagues. Just be honest. Treat my constituents with the respect and dignity so that they can plan. So that a single mom that has a child whose Medicaid may get ripped away, but that child has cancer, how are they going to plan for care in 6 months? So that farmer who started planting seeds recently but was planning over a year on what to do so they could find another customer so that they're not going to lose that farm as well. Now, before I ask you this question, sir, I want to end with this. Senator Booker, you often share a story of Abraham Lincoln's inaugural address, his second, and the man whose reviewed mattered most to the 16th President of the United States.
One of my favorite stories.
When asked his opinion of Lincoln's performance, former slave and abolitionist Frederick Douglass replied, "It was a sacred effort." Let me be the first to say this is a sacred effort, Senator Booker, and I'm proud to stand alongside you. So, Senator Booker, the question that my constituents and I have for you is, can the farmers and ranchers of America afford to pay for another Trump tax scam with all this nonsense that's going on? I mean, it's a question I get when I'm at church, I say not during church, but after church is okay.
Yeah.
Or at the grocery store. But when I'm visiting with folks back home, this is what they're asking me.
And thank you for the question. You said it, the same words that literally, I didn't write these words, my staff wrote this little paragraph here. Trump is pulling the rug from out from under producers that need stability and reliable markets. Because you and I sit, right by each other in the Ag Committee, and we see this connection that you so beautifully say, this idea that we are separate from each other, the invisible lines that divide us in this country are bunk compared to the strong ties that bind us. That farmer producer in a rural neighborhood is deeply connected to the person in my community. And I live in an inner city, Newark, New Jersey. There is a powerful spiritual connection. And you talk to that farmer, and they've got pride that they're feeding America. And they have pride in the ground. You described it so beautifully. They have pride in their soil. They want to be stewards of the land, and they want to create a vibrant American food system. And they rely on people that empower them in that process and don't pull the rug out from under them, drag back contracts, cut programming, especially not those programs that help them get fresh fruits and vegetables, healthy foods to food banks. You talk to the food banks, they'll attest that families, how grateful they are for that fresh fruits and vegetables. You said it right. Parents want the best quality food for their kids. But this food system is killing them. And when I heard the new Secretary of HH&S talk about, hey, we need to get greater access to fresh, healthy foods. Food is medicine. Things I've been saying for years. And what do when they get in there? They cut the very programs that help our farmers and get fresh fruits and vegetables to kids to deal with chronic disease. How could you say out of one side of your mouth, Trump, oh, I'm going to let the Maha people go their way, and then the first thing you do is cut the programs that help kids get healthy, nutritious foods? It makes no sense. It makes no economic sense. It hurts our farmers. It hurts our farm workers. It hurts our end users. It's not fair, and I appreciate your question, sir. Thank you.
Would the senator from New Jersey yield for a question?
Let me think about this for a second.
You take your time thinking about it, sir.
I want to thank Senator Whitehouse. He's been a colleague and a friend for a long time, and he stands right there at that desk for very long speeches. I think I'm trying to go a long time. You go a consistency of times, and you've talked about the climate crisis, you've talked about the Supreme Court scams. You've not only educated members in this body on these issues, you've educated America. You are a YouTube star now, and I learn from you every time I hear you speak. So I'm a little worried right now, but I'm going to step out on faith and yield for a question while retaining the floor.
So, first question. It's been 17 hours. How you doing?
I shall not complain. I shall not complain, but thank you for checking in on me, my friend.
Yeah, well, thank you for what you're doing. Second question, if you would yield for a second
Yes,
question without yielding
I yield
the floor.
for a question while retaining the floor.
One of the ways in which I try to discuss what's going on in this country when people are horrified, anxious, astonished, whatever, is to describe it as the rule of the looters and the polluters. The looters are the creepy billionaires coming to government, trying to figure out how to get even more for themselves. It used to be that people thought that there was a thing too rich to steal. That doesn't seem to be a thing for these creepy billionaires. They're more than happy to wreck Social Security so that they can send in their tech bros and their private equity folks to put right what they have broken. And the looting goes on across the entire face of government, scarred and disfigured by Musk and his little Musk rats, I like to call them. And then, of course, you've got the polluters who are doing a similar thing, which is to steal from the public, only instead of stealing through government, they're stealing by dumping their pollution into our common air, into our common climate future, into our waters, into our lands, and defending through political influence and clout and power and dark money in this building their privilege to pollute for free. And the end point of both of those is regular Americans who are getting, to put it bluntly, pretty hosed, so that people on the other side of that, the creepy billionaires who are behind the climate denial scheme, who are out to wreck the American government so that it can't regulate their conduct or make them behave like honest bankers and investors or insurers or whatever, react for a moment, if you would, to that framing of our beautiful country now being subject to the really malevolent whims of the big looters and the big polluters.
Well, first of all, I will say to you that I meet wealthy people like a group called the Patriotic Millionaires who advocate for progressive tax policy and are the first to say and speak out against this tax scam. I don't, again, it's, to me, what does patriotism mean to you? Patriotism, by definition, means love of country. If you don't love your fellow countrymen and women, how do you love your country? And so what would you do? I actually know what you would do. I don't even have to answer this question. If somehow you came into $1 billion or more dollars, you would not be asking for more. You would literally say, wait a minute, Republican Congress, wait a minute, Donald Trump, what you're trying to do is take away health care from expectant mothers, from disabled children, from seniors, in order to give me more tax credit. I would think that the patriotic thing to do, that the thing in love, you would say, Donald Trump, go screw yourself.
If the senator would yield for another question while retaining the floor.
I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
I would add to your comment and request your response to the observation that not only is this an appalling manifestation of greed by people who already have more money than they're able to spend in their entire lifetimes, but the manner in which they are accomplishing their purpose is pretty loathsome in and of itself. Because the manner in which they are accomplishing their selfish purposes is to corrupt and degrade this great American democracy that we are all here to defend.
Yes.
And they do it by taking their billions and running it through phony front groups, so it pops up as dark money in elections. And of course, the beneficiary of the dark money, the candidate, figures out exactly who's behind the big dark money contribution that ends up in the super PAC that is supporting them. And of course, the big donor knows that they gave the money. So the deal between the creepy billionaire and the in hoc to them political candidate is made. But because it's dark money, because it's secret, because it goes through front groups and into the super PAC and ultimately into the campaign, courts don't know, public doesn't know, voters don't know. Everybody else is left out of the joke.
Yes.
And so, bad enough that they're here arguing for excess benefits for themselves compared to regular Americans. Worse, they're using dark money, corruption to get there. So how is that patriotic?
I want to answer this question so badly, but the crazy thing is the person best to answer this question is the person who asked it. You have sat here and given this detailed analysis to show how this group of very wealthy billionaires in this country are so perverting our system by creating these front groups that then interfere in our democracy in the most disgusting of ways. Even if you are like me and you that can't stand the decision Citizens United, even in Citizens United, the majority opinion said, really projected that we should do the Disclose Act, which we have tried to bring to this floor and get passed. It says no more dark money. How do we have a political system that is so corrupted by billionaires who so with all of their money drown out the voices and politics of other Americans. A great example of that is they're getting so reckless that many billionaires aren't even hiding it anymore, i.e. Elon Musk. He's like saying, hey, I'm going to roll up into a Supreme Court case up in one of our best Great Lakes states, and I'm just going to dump $100 million there and then give away, as if to insult our democracy, million-dollar checks as part of my effort to influence an election with my overwhelming flood-the-zone amount of billions of dollars. And by the way, hey, it's a pretty good investment, right? I'm Donald Trump's biggest campaign contributor, and as soon as he gets elected, a lot of my stock goes up, although Tesla stock isn't doing so great right now. The reality is, we live in a country right now that we're giving more and more ability for billionaires to use their wealth to rig the system and then get more wealth as a result of that. It is so corrupt and so corrupting to this. We have been talking about this, as you said, for 18 hours now. This big, unchecked corporate contributions, billionaire dollars, dark money in front organizations that nobody in the Senate has outlined better than you, is corrupting our Constitution, and even the bad case Citizens United, even they said this shouldn't happen. You all should write laws in this place that force people to disclose where that money's coming from. But how many years has it been since Citizens United? Many. And how many times have we failed? 15? Guys, I don't know, and I'm so grateful for this man, because all my colleagues who are assembled here know. Doggedly and determinedly, you have stood right there with charts and graphs. You've outlined it ad nauseum. They've attacked you because your truth is so threatening to them that more people will know about how big money is corrupting democracy. And so how many assaults are we going to have to watch in 71 days when we now have a president that can create a meme coin? Isn't there something here, my great constitutional scholar, a big word called emoluments? This president has basically created a meme coin where we now know, hard to trace this, that millions of dollars have been put into his pocket. I have my team reading about it right now. Foreign countries, Russian oligarchs, incredible Arab wealth. You want to pay off the Donald Trump? You know, because his government is being run like this. It's not JFK. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. You've seen how he's behaved. It's ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for Donald Trump. That's how he does business. How do we know that? Look at the evidence of the last 71 days. If you are a law firm that comes to him and offers him $40 million of pro bono work. God, how many people I love in Newark had that kind of legal representation, pro bono. He is beating you up, threatening to ruin your business until you come to him and tell him what you're going to do for him. We're seeing it. You want a merger? You want a merger? What do? Give $1 million to his inaugural committee, and then find ways to get money to him through his meme coin,